Hi, I'm Andy Powell. Welcome to the Purpose Project. All topics are fair game. I hope you enjoy. All right, Doug Eckenrod. That's how you say your name, right?
Yes, sir.
Right on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction so people kind of know who you are and why you're here.
Okay.
And then we'll go from there. So first, you're running for sheriff for Yavapai County in 2024.
It sounds funny to hear somebody else say it, but yes.
That's what's happening.
Yeah.
Right on. So you come from California, and over there you were a really big part of law enforcement world.
Yeah.
And you had a 21-year law enforcement career over there. You're the deputy director for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation Division of Adult Parole Operations.
It's a lot of words to say.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've worked in, supervised, and managed California State Parole, sex offender, human trafficking, gang, and state fugitive operations. You are an opinion writer for the Epoch Times, covering criminal justice-related topics and current events.
Right.
And you are also a lieutenant in the Arizona Rangers.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. Did I miss anything? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more you did.
There's a lot more I did, but that's how things ended when I escaped.
Right on.
Right.
Right on. Dude, too many people saying that word coming from California, man.
Yeah. That means
Escaping.
something. That
Yeah.
means something.
Okay, cool. So the main topics I want to get into today are some of the stuff on your website,
Sure.
like the Hegelian dialectic and the Machiavellian. What was the word you had on there? Machiavellian style violence or something like
Yeah.
that. Obviously stuff with the sheriff's office, what that entails, serving the people, things like that. So we'll chug through some of the stuff on your website first, some of the quotes I found there that I liked and stuff I want some expansion on.
Sure.
One thing he said is, a central purpose of my campaign should be seen as a warning from someone who has observed the Machiavellian plans of the extreme violent left.
EVL. I hope I can patent that if you put quotes around it. Evil. Because that's what they are. Extreme violent left.
Okay. And can you expand on that a little bit when you say the warning? Like, what kind of warning are you giving people, and how is the left creating this type of violence?
Think of the best way to describe this so it's teachable. I was hired as a peace officer in 2001, and from about 2001 to about 2012, I felt like the legislation in California was somewhat balanced. I mean, there were folks who were, in my opinion, anti-public safety, and there were folks who were pro-public safety, but the public was educated and had a desire to reduce crime. For example, something that people are generally surprised to hear, that homicide in the United States, as well as in Arizona and California, peaked in 1994. And we reached some of the lowest levels in 60 years in both states, and nationally, in 2018. Kind of antithetical to what people believe is increasing violence. But what people have to understand is, when there's legislation, it's not like one day it impacts. It's like the legislation's passed and the governor signs it. It's not like the next day you feel the effect. It's an accumulative trauma. And so, like I said, in 2012, there was a change. There's something I started seeing in California. And what it was the weaponization of the governor's office. Here's an example. You remember that you're a little bit younger than me, but you may remember the 2007-8 housing crisis.
I do.
You probably know somebody who was impacted by it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I asked you, what was the centerpiece of the crisis? What caused it? If I was to ask you, what would your opinion be?
My opinion would be the excessive selling of mortgages.
Bingo.
From one company to another.
Right.
Back and forth between corporations.
Right. So, in 2006 and 2007, I could show up with a W-2 written on a napkin and go to a lender and get a loan. And so the pressure to purchase a home was pushing up real estate values. And what's associated with real estate values? Property taxes. And who lives on property taxes? Counties. So there's a famous Obama advisor. I think he ended up being the mayor of Chicago. His name escapes me because I'm getting old. But he said, don't ever let a crisis go to waste.
Oh, I've heard that.
And and so born out of the housing crisis.
I think one of the Rockefellers was one of the first people
Probably.
to say that.
Yeah,
actually.
he probably stole it. Yeah. So so in California, for example, most of the sheriff's departments are headed by Republicans, even still. It's confusing for folks when they hear that because the big population centers, Los Angeles, the big counties, no, they're left. So they can swing the entire state politically. But there are tiny little counties all over the place that there's 58 counties. Most of them are headed by a Republican. However, everyone in state government has got to be vigilant against spending and their own ego. So in a sheriff's department, in any law enforcement agency, you earn your chops at the lowest level and you promote and you promote and you promote. And at a certain point, you're like, man, if I get an opportunity to get the reins, I'm going to take care of the men and women in uniform while protecting the public. I can't wait to get more authority so I can articulate what we need and what we don't need. And I can guide legislators to where they want to go.
Make the world a better place.
That's what you want to do,
Yeah.
right? But all too frequently, when you penetrate to a certain level, you promote to a certain level, you're no longer surrounded by folks in uniform. You're surrounded by contractors and mental health professionals and social workers who want a piece of the pie. They're all telling you what a great guy or gal you are, how smart you are, how different you are than your predecessors. And also, man, if you just invest in this particular thing, insert whatever it is, you'll have a better outcome with no evidence. And so sheriffs all over California, even the conservative ones, running large bureaucracies with multi-million-dollar budgets, they all did the same thing. They spent too much money and built, literally and metaphorically, effigies to themselves, i.e., things like justice centers, large jails and offices and new cars. And then, man, wouldn't it be nice if we had some people to take off some of these responsibilities off my chief deputies and commanders? And
It's like it's asexually reproducing.
it's a self-licking ice cream machine.
It's perpetuating itself to be bigger and more powerful.
Exactly. And everybody around you now is saying you're the best guy because money is bleeding out of your budget. It's not necessarily going to patrol or jail operations, right? It's going to rehabilitative services or diversity and equity training that's mandatory online, and so there's a million different burdens, right? It's like anybody ever tow, I RV, there comes a point where your car is overburdened, your truck, you should have got the diesel, right? Because your family has put too much stuff in the back of this thing. At some point it breaks down.
Yep.
Okay, so who funds the sheriff's departments across the country? Well,
People.
county board supervisors,
taxpayers.
counties, right? County funds the sheriff's department, taxpayers in the county. And so in 2006 and 2007, folks were imputing revenue, meaning they were forecasting like a chart. Oh, my goodness, look at 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12. And so when you're looking at this huge windfall of money coming your way and people are asking for commitments in the future, well, hey, I got to stay elected. I need the support of these different organizations now that can say that I'm a balanced sheriff, right? Then the housing crisis happens. And then projection versus reality. And the gap between those things, right? Because you've already written the checks. You've already entered into contractual agreements. How do you close the gap? That's the problem. And so you said that, the Rockefeller maybe is the first person to use that. Don't let a
Good crisis go to waste.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Brown administration in California, and I hate to keep using California examples, but California has trained the rest of the country, the far left, how to do this. So that's why I'm talking to you as somebody coming from Arizona's future, right? Coming back in time, in a sense, saying, man, don't do these things. I can't tell you exactly what to do for sure,
Right, but not this.
but don't do these things,
Yeah.
right?
You know, what's funny, most people that pay any kind of attention to what's happening in the world recognize that stuff.
Right.
But they're not the decision makers.
Right.
They're not the ones, they're just the taxpayers.
Just the taxpayers. So the Brown administration came up with a brilliant solution. The Brown administration, I don't know if you're probably too young to know this, Governor Brown was governor, 30 years ago. I don't know if you knew that.
No.
He was governor before, then became the mayor of San Francisco and was out of politics altogether, and then sort of resurrected his career after Arnold Schwarzenegger. And Brown is a lefty, not a good guy. And so he mastered the utilization of weaponization of task force money, and then hiding money in assembly bills. So here's an example. Do you have a dog?
No, I have, though.
Okay. And have you ever had to give it medication before, or seen anybody have to give a dog medication?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Oh, depends on what kind of medication it is. Usually, if it's pills, you'll crush it up, put it in the food.
Yeah.
If it's liquid, you'll hold the dog's mouth open and shoot a syringe in there.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Okay. So my parents would just stuff the whole darn pill in a hot dog.
Oh, yep.
And,
I've heard that one.
Right. They just, gobble it down, right, without thinking. Mm-hmm. You're not trying to feed it a hot dog. You're just trying to get that little pill that's in there. And so the Brown administration, what they did is they had all of this failed anti-public safety legislation that had been on the books, the left of the left in California, on the books that had failed, centered around releasing people early, decriminalizing about 50% of crime, where you don't
50%?
Yeah, what they did is they played on the public's non-understanding of penal code.
Yeah.
And so about half the crimes that would have resulted in a prison sentence, they didn't. They would go to county supervision or county decisions, jail or probation. And of course, because they didn't have enough money to run these things, they would push toward probation to save dough. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so, but you've got these sheriffs who are desperate. Remember, we talked about the reality and forecast and the gap. Mm-hmm. And so Brown had all this terrible anti-public safety legislation, and he would stuff financial treats for sheriff's departments
Into the proverbial hot dog
exactly
of the bill.
And then, so a sheriff then who's in trouble financially, and it doesn't make a difference if it's an R or D behind his name.
Yeah.
He or she's in trouble, right? And then also the Brown administration slick. They retitled all of their anti-public safety legislation to sound like public safety legislation, right?
Yeah.
Like if you read, the title, and this is an exaggeration. Well, maybe not. The title, lower homicide, and then on page 4, release 10,000 people early. I mean, that would be like how disjointed the names are from reality. But on page 10. Counties would get X percent of a $500 million jackpot, literally. And so, you can imagine these executive teams huddling around this proposed legislation. Well, are we going to come out against this? It's not good for public safety, but
I was just looking at the money.
And so in their minds, if we can bridge this gap, we can affect public safety in a different way, trying to psychologically manage this.
Yeah, they're justifying poor decision making.
Exactly. And so sheriffs, when I was a young man in California, you could count on county sheriffs to say, hey, this legislation is bad. People are going to die because of this. But when the extreme violent left got the reins in Sacramento, they retooled their whole program, and they weaponized the utilization of state dollars, hiding it in legislation or in task forces. And so you can stand up a big task force, lots of dough, something that's really in the mind's eye of the people, and the sheriffs will stop criticizing the legislation and the governor because their slice of the dough is going to be impacted by their go along to get along attitude.
Yeah.
And so by the time that Gavin Newsom got the reins in California, and I can tell you a lot about him, one of the slickest, most worthy adversaries you can think of, really. I mean, the guy is dangerous. Like, I guess I have to look at the camera when I say this. Like, if you're a conservative, right, and you're concerned about Gavin Newsom, you're not concerned enough, because I was an appointee, one of the only conservatives who was able to somehow stumble through, because I had a pretty good track record.
He appointed you directly?
His office.
Okay.
So I wasn't chosen. I was a guy who was put forth by my organization, and then the governor's office says, "Okay, we'll concur."
Based on paperwork, you're like who you are on paper.
On paper,
I see. So they never interviewed you personally or anything like that.
The Secretary of the Department of Corrections and executives from other agencies did that, and they say, "Hey, this is the guy we want running it."
Okay.
And the governor's office has to stamp it. That's the career executive appointment process. It also stands for career ends abruptly, because you're serving at will. They can fire you for any reason, any time. And even these nuts, fortunately for me, I had no social media presence for years being a peace officer, right? So I didn't want to bring attention to my family. So there wasn't really any signal for them to see that I was going to be a problem. And I became a problem for them, but I'll get into that later. But nonetheless, this guy is sophisticated and has mastered the weaponization of money to silence opposition, even on the right. And I saw the Republican Party eat its own for dollars in California and lay down. And that's why, the moment I could, like a Berlin Wall moment, I escaped to a free state.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. The next quote that I have here, funny enough, is Arizona is literally the last... Let me say this again more clearly. Arizona is literally the last line of defense for much of the nation.
Yes.
How so?
So, you mentioned earlier I write for the Epoch Times. And when I first started writing for them, it was strictly law enforcement related analysis and trends. But unfortunately, the reality, the bell came off in my mind. Hey, I'm going to have to expand what I'm speaking about, because we've leaders have been installed in Arizona and in Washington that don't take their oath seriously. In fact, I think they're actively bringing about the destruction of the country intentionally. And so I wrote an article for the Epoch Times that went viral. It was one of their, proud to say, one of their hottest opinion pieces they'd had in years. And I titled it, "Eisenhower Was Right, Arizona is in Trouble." And it's somewhat salacious, and the Epoch Times readers are a little bit more gray hair than most readers. And so some of them recall Eisenhower as a president, and then they're probably thinking to themselves when they're reading the title, what's the relationship between Eisenhower, who was president in the 50s, and in Arizona today?
Was it Eisenhower who gave the speech about the military-industrial complex?
He did. And contemporary to that, he was one of the first guys to speak about the domino theory. And have you heard of the domino theory?
I don't think so.
It was used to describe the United States foreign policy concerns around Southeast Asia. And the thought was any country physically bordering China will be undermined militarily, politically, financially, socially, culturally by China, and is likely to be flipped to communism. Of course, it turned out to be true. North Vietnam, then South Vietnam, North Korea, Laos, Cambodia. And then if you look at the track record of Marxism wherever it's been tried and where it's failed, and you look at the literal human cost, and tens of millions of skulls literally piled, and Cambodia is an example of this, but I mean, there's all over Southeast Asia where Marxism won for a time, still dominant feature there. Domino theory was right.
Was domino theory from Eisenhower's mind?
Yes.
Okay.
He was the first one to use that, and then later on, Kennedy and LBJ used that as reasons to draw a line in the sand, literally and figuratively, in the middle of Vietnam to hold back communist aggression. And then the moment we were out of there, obviously South Vietnam fell, and Laos, Cambodia, and a lot of other countries suffered from communism. So I make the analogy that we are bordering the new China, which is California, and so is Oregon.
And Mexico.
You think about Oregon, Washington, their politics, how they've fallen off.
Yeah.
How Nevada turning purple.
Oh.
How Arizona. Now this is something I want to get into with you if we can, right? So Katy Hobbs did not win the election.
Correct.
Right? It's fact.
Yes.
But she does have a problem that Gavin Newsom doesn't have. And this is something that I think we can work on. That podcasts like you can actually have a difference. We were talking about that before the show, like what can be done. Mm-hmm. So in Gavin Newsom's case, a large chunk of the populace has gone crazy. Through education, GMO, whatever it is, 5G, you insert assault on the body and the mind, right?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine policing that state.
All those vaccines are messing everybody
during
up.
COVID, during BLM and Antifa, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
And Gavin Newsom could go out and probably stab somebody on camera, right? And he'd get reelected. The person was not adhering to. The person was anti-trans that he stabbed, so it was okay. I mean, it'd be something, it would be justified.
Yes.
And so he doesn't have an electoral problem there. He can do whatever he wants. He can sign any piece of legislation he wants. Nothing's going to happen. But Katy Hobbs, it's my opinion, and I'm sure some listeners would have a different number in mind, but it's my opinion that about 7% of the votes that she got were fraudulent. She won by, a few 10,000 votes, supposedly.
I think it was 17.
17.
Mm-hmm.
And so
17,000, not 17.
Right.
Yeah.
so 7% of the entire election would be a lot more than that, right? Kerry Lake won that thing easy.
Yeah.
Landslide. But she still has a re-election problem because they can't really get beyond 10% cheating, right? There's a limit to what they can do because you got conservatives that are energized that are going to be looking at drop boxes and there'll be more scrutiny on this next go around in the gubernatorial election here.
Yeah.
So if she can only count on getting another 3% of cheating, right? She has to get at least 39% of the vote to win, right? With me?
No. 39?
Right, because 39 plus the 10 she steals.
Ah.
Right, there'll be a third party candidate in there, gets 2 or 3%.
I see.
So
nice.
So to some extent, some tiny extent, she has to play nice in the sandbox a little bit. I mean, she can't stab people. She can maybe hit someone with a baseball bat, but she can't stab people like Gavin Newsom can do. And so hopefully we come back to this. I'm leaving a lot of things to come back to, but she still has to pretend. She's got to take lipstick, a little bit of lipstick, and put it on that pig of this border.
Yeah. Well, that's why she did the thing where she apparently sued the Biden administration for $500-something million for their dereliction of duty for the, I can't recall the what amendment it is, but the requirement of the federal government to secure the border for the states.
Right.
So that's putting the lipstick on the pig.
And that was negotiated with the Biden administration before she did it.
Oh, really?
So think about this. If you control the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
And you can just squirt out $501 million, and that makes helps you retain a state, keeps her in power during the presidential election because they're not synced up, and then through hook or crook, she has some oversight of the election process here. And if you get a close one here in Arizona, and you need those electoral votes, then you better keep Katy Hobbs in a position that appears oppositional with her real master, right? And 500, who cares? It's not his money. Mm-hmm. So they negotiate this theater. It's theater.
Yep.
And it helps her with her election problem here.
Yeah.
And then she can turn around and use our money to create those little pills that you put in the hot dog, which she's done through task force grant money that's being given to all 15 Arizona sheriffs. And how many of them have financial problems? So,
wow. There's two other well, there's probably a lot of other, but two other factors toward her getting reelected is you've got God knows how many people coming across the border.
Sure.
Dozens of thousands.
Sure.
Tens of
Get to make
thousands.
them citizens ASAP, right? Yeah, get them
And
voting
even
rights.
if they're not made to be citizens,
Right.
they apparently still are able to vote. Some of the stuff that, not Project Veritas, but James O'Keefe.
Mm-hmm.
What James O'Keefe is doing right now down in Phoenix is looking at this like an abandoned high school that is now being turned into a facility that's storing migrants. It's just
Yeah.
they're bus loading people in, and then
Right.
but he's talking to people at Sky Harbor, and these illegal immigrants are saying, oh, yes, I intend to vote in the next election, and
Sure.
I intend to vote for Biden or whoever.
Right.
And
Because they all have state issued cell phones. And they'll be reminded.
that's right. Yeah.
They'll be reminded just on time because we want to make sure we get as many voters out there as possible, exercising their right to vote, even if you're not a citizen.
Yeah. So in that sense, I mean, if she does win the re-election, it's not really stealing, but it is. It's far worse than stealing.
Oh yeah, I mean this is a problem at the federal level because if we ever get justice, if it ever really happens, there are some people who are going to go to prison,
At
right?
least.
And so there's nothing more dangerous. I ran State of California's fugitive teams for several years, and there's nothing scarier than somebody who's facing serious charges. They're going to never get out. Homicide suspect, clear, and the guy's a drug addict, and he's barricaded in an apartment complex. Disaster, right? Can't use all the tools you traditionally use to extricate somebody and dealing with all the other collateral damage. And this person is committed; they're not going back. And so you think about these folks in Washington who can't lose this election. So either there won't be an election, or they're going to cheat, or they're going to do other things that could be worse. And so that's the way I see it. But to put a bookend on you had asked about
The leftist,
the
extreme
leftists,
leftist violence.
So, one of the facts that just appears to be underreported is the fact that Gavin Newsom's war chest is huge, huge. I mean, he has enough money to run for president right now. In fact, I believe he is the nominee. He will be the nominee. This old red-headed guy say it first. He's going to be the nominee. It will not be Biden. Through hook or crook. Whoever, insert the reason, it'll be Gavin Newsom. And had so much money that the California PACs, Democratic PACs, super PACs, delivered truckloads of money directly across the border. Right, one of the tenets of undermining, if you're a communist nation, undermining whoever's bordering you, to the Arizona super PAC that then funded Katy Hobbs' machine. And then before the show, we talked a little bit about, hey, there's almost like a shadow government associated with large governor's offices, right? To include campaign strategists and media experts and blah, blah, blah. And so those folks were put on loan, in a sense, advising Hobbs' team how to do this. They didn't wake up one day, and she's no rocket scientist, clearly.
Right. Yeah,
right?
No, she doesn't appear to be very intelligent.
Right, moron. So she's got people around her that are guiding her through this process. And all she has to do is I guess she doesn't have to do anything because she didn't do anything during that campaign. She didn't speak. She didn't run.
Yeah,
she didn't rally.
She didn't campaign at all.
Right.
The other thing I was going to say about her is that aside from those illegal immigrants and the votes, you also have something like Runbeck. You know what Runbeck is?
No.
Runbeck is the third-party election, the counter, the company that counts all the ballots and everything. Majority shareholder owner Ben Toma, I think, and then also the Sinaloa cartel.
Doesn't her attorney general have some connections to the Sinaloa cartel? Had represented people as an attorney in the United States
You're
years
thinking
earlier?
of Adrian Fontes, the Secretary of Secretary of State. Yeah, Adrian Fontes, and he represented somebody in the Sinaloa cartel, but defense lawyers are going to defend whoever.
Sure.
That aside, he also has created, I believe it was 14 false appointed positions, 13 or 14 phantom positions of people that did or didn't exist that were appointed to these positions that never actually did any of that. And that's proven. So
Yeah.
so you got Runbeck,
Prison.
you got illegal immigrant. Yeah, sure. Prison, at least. At least these people are destroying our nation on purpose. It's got to be. It's treason.
Yeah.
The punishment for treason is death.
Yeah.
I call for that for treason.
Sure.
Now, Arizona being the last line of defense for much of the nation. Now, how is it a line of what about Arizona makes it that? Because I believe it is that.
Yeah.
But what about it?
So, there are spiritual victories, there's psychological victories, and then there's military victories, right? You could demoralize your enemy. Arizona, I've been coming here for 20 years. My parents have lived here for the last 25 years. So I knew I was going to retire here. And I'm a competitive shooter, right? And shooting sports and freedom and open carry. And there's a spirit of independence here that runs, I think, deeper than anywhere else in the country. And so if you can defeat Arizona, what's that say to Idaho? To Colorado, right? Texas is a tough nut. Maybe, Texas is getting a little bit purple too. Florida, right? But
they're making it appear that they're getting purple, but I don't know that that's actually what's happening.
Well, there have been some good things that have happened there recently in regards to the border with them active Texas utilizing the Texas National Guard.
Eagle Point. You're talking about them taking Eagle Point.
That was the fenced off. They fenced off a huge area and
right at the river.
Didn't some folks drown recently? And the left was trying to blame it on the National Guard, typical of what the left would do.
I don't know.
There's people drowning there, unfortunately, all the time.
Yeah,
coming across, and I feel for these people trying to come over here.
For sure,
they're breaking the law. I'd probably try to get over here too.
I would too.
But the drownings are a function of hundreds of them every year, unfortunately. But to say that's an outgrowth of Texas
trying to protect our nation.
Right. Yeah. Right. Insane.
Yeah. If you weren't trying to protect the nation, those people wouldn't have drowned.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. It does have a deep spirit of independence, a spirit of freedom.
Right.
The American spirit is housed here for sure.
I just would add that my experience with the Arizona Rangers. So I've been a Ranger for 2 years. I was a peace officer in California for 21 years. And in 2 years, in my assignments throughout Yavapai County, I received more positive feedback from the public than my entire career times 5 in California. That's no exaggeration. In fact, I'd go so far as to say this: if somebody assaulted me in my Ranger uniform, I'd have to beg the public to not kill the poor son of a gun who attacked me.
Right.
We got to bring this guy to justice. Please leave him breathing. Right.
Yeah.
Because the public here is so pro law enforcement and pro military and pro liberty.
And justice.
And so I think our jobs, in a sense, are, hey, let's give these voters, irrespective of what happens with my campaign, doesn't make any difference. Let's give these voters some weapons to help them understand the New York shell game that these folks are doing, because they are good and they are sophisticated. And that's half of my message, I think.
Right on. Well, that's good stuff. We need that equipment now more than ever. We were talking about the governor, if you want to call her that, but you have a strong opinion about her failure to secure the southern border. So I'm curious, as a sheriff in Yavapai County, what can you do to support that aside from have an opinion?
Okay, so there's when you're looking at a problem from a government standpoint, there are always two solutions buried in there. One is sort of the medical solution: do no harm or stop the harm. So, for example, if I'm your doctor and I'm giving you medication that's making you worse, I should stop giving you that medication. And so stop doing some of the things that we're doing in Yavapai County, and I'll explain that. And then the other thing is to highlight the failures nationally, regionally, locally, using all means necessary.
Put it on blast.
On blast, every single one, every arrest that happens in Yavapai County that has even the slightest nexus to
the border,
blasting them. Mm-hmm. Another Hobbs failure on a running Twitter stream, right? newsprint. You'd have no problem lining up the majority of conservative media outlets here to interview about Katy Hobbs' failure, right? So the stop and the harm. Let's talk about that for a second. I'll come back to a little bit more about what I would be saying out loud. So the current sheriff, 29-year veteran, Yavapai County. I don't have a hat on, but hats off to that service. And we have the good fortune of having him in the position of the president of the Arizona Sheriff's Association. I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't.
And a little bit unusual, the tiny population we have here relative to the rest of the state. Yeah, he's got that position. To be honest with you, I don't know that much about how he got it, but he has it, which means he has the microphone. Like this microphone here, he's got the microphone for all 15 sheriffs. Mm-hmm. And you hear, a little bit of squeaking. The border is causing us problems in Arizona. And the answer is, give me more money. And so what Katy Hobbs has done is she vacated the border strike force. There was a border strike force that Doug Ducey had up, right?
What did that consist of?
There was a multi-jurisdictional effort with peace officers from across the state doing some border enforcement. Not enough. There's like $17 million associated with this thing. So she vaporizes that. Very same day, they intentionally added a 0.1 to this number. She moved $17.1 million, same day as she vacates the border strike force. She moves it to woke educational projects, which won't surprise you.
Do you have an example of what that would be?
It would be like incentives to school to deliver certain curriculum. Exactly. So think about, like, I used to be in favor of some federal investments under Bush, No Child Left Behind, things like this. All it turned out to be is a vehicle, just like I described, a vehicle to insert curriculum, and then educational districts that are starving need the money, and they'll pimp themselves out and sell teach whatever they're told.
Even though the students and the teachers aren't receiving the effects of that money, it's really a lot of the administration
Bingo, brother.
giving themselves bonuses or improving their office or things like that.
Except for the bonuses, I think everything could apply here to Yavapai County Sheriff's Office.
Really?
Yeah. New cars, remodeling, buildings, furniture, 3 non-sworn public information officers. I was a public information officer as an ancillary assignment. They've got 3 of them. They've got spokespeople for their mental health director. All of this money not going to patrol operations, which is dangerously understaffed, not only for the public, but for the men and women in uniform pushing a patrol car. And the jail's even worse. So where were we? We were talking about the border and,
how Yavapai can have an effect on the border.
So the sheriff's got this megaphone through the Sheriff's Association, and he could be pounding Katy Hobbs and Biden on put troops at the border. People are dying.
But he's not.
What he's saying is, hey, we need more human trafficking money up in Yavapai County, because the solution to human trafficking, I've worked on these task forces. I've made more arrests of sex offenders than, it wouldn't be too many people who've made more, because I was in those specific special assignments where I'm popping 4 of these guys a week for years. So Katy Hobbs titles human trafficking grant fund contemporary with a very good movie. I can't remember what it was called. I saw it recently about human trafficking.
Sound of Freedom.
Excellent movie, man. If you haven't seen it,
You've seen it. Incredible.
I hope all your viewers see it. Excellent.
Very moving.
Very accurate too. But the place to fight human trafficking is at, and you said I could curse,
You can say whatever you want.
the fucking border. We know exactly the 5 major transnational routes. We know what's coming over. Here's an example, for example. So we've got about 17,000 homicides as a nation per year, roughly. Goes up and down a little bit, right? Got about 40,000 suicides per year. Sad. People take their own lives.
All lumped into gun violence, isn't it?
No. They just want you to compare the numbers, right? Way more suicides than homicides.
No, I know, but when they're giving gun violence
Sure.
numbers,
Yeah.
they lump the suicides in.
I pulled them out for this example.
Oh, you did?
I did.
Okay, great.
Yeah, because I want people to see the order of magnitude.
Cool.
The next number, let's talk about overdoses. Before Biden, I guess it would be like BB, before Biden, about 70,000 overdoses.
Per year nationwide?
Yeah,
All drugs considered?
all
And is this deaths
deaths.
from overdose?
Yep.
Okay.
Deaths. Thank you for clarifying that. After Biden, AB, 93,000. 23,000 more, eclipsing all gun deaths combined by a large margin. Clear demarcation, right? And the vast majority of these overdoses have a nexus to the border because that fentanyl that's being cut up and put in everything because it's so inexpensive and gives such an incredible high with such a microdose. It is the most profitable vehicle to get your crazy on. So we know where it's coming from. Precursor chemicals coming from China. The precursor chemicals are then assembled in a location where we know it's at in Mexico. Be a good A-10 target area for the United States
If only they had the will.
Air Force. Yeah. Is it the Air Force that has the A-10 or is it the Marine Corps? I don't know.
It could be both. I don't know.
Yeah. You know, the A-10 is awesome. I love
yeah.
that. Every time I can mention A-10, I do. So, and then they're assembled there. And then, you know, of course, because people are free, the mules are free, and only tiny percentage of them could ever possibly be caught. And then almost that percentage is reduced to almost zero now that we have no border at all.
Yeah.
You know, people just flooding across the border with dope and being consolidated and distributed all across the country. Same thing with the human trafficking. So, you know, people are driving through Yavapai County. Heck, the Biden administration is transporting people through Yavapai County to relocate them on buses in different parts of the country. I'm not aware of anybody being dropped off in Yavapai, but I do know that 17 is a mechanism to move people further into the country, and that's happening all over the place. Now using airports more frequently.
Interstate 17 for those who don't live in Arizona.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
So, so the border failure is killing people.
Yeah.
In the tens of thousands. And then the impact of violent crime. I mean, there's so many outgrowths of fentanyl and violent crime. But the solution isn't the $2.1 million that Yavapai County Sheriff's Office received from Katy Hobbs as a gift. And if you look on her website, she really demonstrates the cozy relationship that she has with our current sheriff. And
really? She's
quoted in there, and it's a very, very loving thing. But he does use the microphone to say, hey, we need more money to fight human trafficking up here in Yavapai County.
Wow.
We need to increase that because their budget is blown. And everybody wants to stop human trafficking, as they should. So nobody gets in the way of, well, what are you standing up here? You're standing up a task force. Where do the people come from to staff the task force? If I was to ask, I know you haven't worked in law enforcement, where would you think they come from?
To staff the task force for human trafficking?
Yeah.
It'd probably be the county.
Yeah. It'd be sheriff's deputies.
Yeah.
And then you would backfill behind them, right?
Yep. Hire new guys to fill the patrol roles.
Right. And I'm being sarcastic when I say this, but you go to the vending machine where you get nurses and patrol deputies and you go get them and just plug them in behind. So that's the problem. Mm-hmm. Is there's intentional salary savings accumulating with the sheriff's department.
I see.
So there are 107 patrol deputies, right? And you run 10 short. And so where does the money go for those 10? It goes back to the county? It goes to plug the gaps with all this crazy spending they've got going on. And then if you pull 20 or 18 or I don't know, something like that, 18 or 20 more into task force, you take the money for the task force, and now you got more salary savings, right, to plug the holes of the mismanagement of the budget. So the analogy would be like you've been to the ER before. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you had stellar performance there. They were very on time, and you had a great...
Nope.
Yeah, all of us. None of us have had, right? It's all miserable.
Yeah.
So imagine the hospital administrator on the Friday night where it's mayhem, just plucks 3 of the intake nurses out of there to do chart review on a grant from the state on the 3rd floor, right? What's that do to the quality of service in the ER?
It decreases the quality of service by a lot.
And that's exactly what's happening. And it's showing up, the signal is showing up in the crime numbers and some other numbers I can share with you too, with the amount of service that these poor men and women in uniform in Yavapai County Sheriff's Office are able to deliver, and their own safety. Can I give you an example, a statistical example?
Please.
So, to the listener, you shouldn't trust anything I'm saying. I'm from California, right? This would be a question mark over my head.
Oh, man.
So what you do is you go to the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office 2022 report that summarizes what happened in 22. And generally, so you know, criminal justice reports lag 6 months to a year behind the year you're actually in. Mm-hmm. So they'll be ready to release their 23 report here in a few months, I'm sure. But a couple pages down in the report, and the report covers the command areas. There's 4 command areas in Yavapai County Sheriff's Office, and the calls for service and the fluctuation versus year over year and things like that, and the type of calls. And but one of the numbers that they probably will have deleted, I don't know, it might be a bridge too far for them to delete something that's in the public record, but
no, it's not. No, it's not.
I'm not leveraging that level of cynicism on the folks here locally, but
maybe not in Yavapai, but it's definitely happening in Maricopa.
Yeah. So we'd probably agree in 2008 the population was a lot less here, and the sheriff's department was a lot smaller. Mm. And they were running, and I might be off by 1,000 or 2, but they were running about 33,000 self-initiated calls per year. Which
self-initiated?
Yeah. So, a citizen, you call 911, I have a problem. That's a call for service. But I'll make up an example. So, it wouldn't be both of us in the car together, but I'm just going to put us both in the car together. So, you're my FTO.
Mm-hmm. Field training officer.
Thank you.
Yep.
And we're driving down 89A, and we're driving by Larry's welding shop. There is no Larry's welding shop, by the way.
But we're driving by it.
We're driving by it.
What do we see?
3 a.m. And we're way off. But I can see there's a white van. And we know Larry. He doesn't have a white van. And you see flashlights moving around, right? Mm. So we kill our lights, and we get across the center median and go across the road so we can get a better angle on these folks. And got our binoculars, and now I'm out with dispatch, and I'm running the plate out, and it comes back stolen out of Phoenix. And you know what you and I do? We freaking high five in the car. Felony arrest, right? Put out with dispatch, ask for a cover unit. We ask them to come in with their lights off, right? So we can approach safely together and sort of surprise these guys from a tactical standpoint, right? Makes sense how we would do that. Mm-hmm. And maybe cover is 7 or 8 or 10 minutes out. So fast forward to 2018, 2020, one of the two. If you're listening to this, it's 2018 or 2022. You'll see the data on the charts. That number from 33,000 went to 16. It was cut in half. That, in other words,
of self-initiated
contacts,
calls.
Right? So you're proactively policing. You've heard that term, right?
Yep.
So you're looking for problems, and you're interceding crime before it happens, and so you're like, man, the county has probably doubled since 2008, maybe tripled with all the folks like me escaping, and the sheriff's office has certainly kept pace with that. So how can you have half as many? And simultaneously, you'll see the graph crisscross where the self-initiated calls were more than calls for service from the public, and that crosses.
My guess would be because they're twice as busy because of the amount of people who have come here during that time.
Yeah, but the total calls for service are pretty flat. In other words, you aggregate those numbers for the public calling and the self-initiated, and that totals very similar, which is kind of strange.
Okay.
This is what I'm hypothesizing, because we're probably down in a real sense 27 to 30 patrol deputies. Cover unit response times go from 15 minutes to
30, 40.
Some of the outlying areas more than an hour. And that's a guy that's going code.
Yeah.
huge. The geographical span of Yavapai is gargantuan.
Going code means lights and sirens. So
Yeah.
if you got somebody that works way out in the boonies in some, let's say, I don't know, let's say Ash Fork. Is Ash Fork in Yavapai?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So let's say you have one deputy that's assigned to that area at the midnight shift, and they have something major happen where they need to call for backup immediately. And I'm in, the closest place, maybe I'm in Prescott. To get from Prescott to Ash Fork going lights and sirens as fast as you can, it's still going to take you way more time than it should to get aid to that officer or that deputy.
So I hypothesize that in the second scenario, the men and women are doing a great job here that are in uniform in Yavapai County. I want to get that out there, right? But there is a scenario in which somebody makes a decision, whether Larry's Welding Shop's on the right, where I just turn my head to the left because I know cover's an hour out.
You think that's the reason? Because of cover?
I think that's a factor.
Yeah.
How deep are you going to get in it? There's a vehicle that looks suspicious, tinted out windows, missing a rear plate, 4 men in the car that look like they're Hispanic origin. Car's beat up. Are they moving dope? Am I going to do a car stop and these folks are going to get killed if they don't deliver their dope? So they're definitely going to fight me.
Right.
Do I make that car stop in the pitch black, an hour out, and going to hold these guys at gunpoint until I get cover?
Probably not.
Do I just not make that car stop? I don't know. I mean, I'm not a witness to it, but it's something to consider when you are that understaffed.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a tragedy. I can't say. I'm not saying that it's directly related to this, but there was a sergeant that was killed about a year and a half ago. I think you're familiar with the case here in town that bled to death, was shot. And I can't say whether cover would have made a difference or not, but it was a pretty good wait to get him help. And you just don't want to see that happen again. If it's something that you can learn from and make adjustments to scheduling and recruitment. And look, in some of these scenarios, if it's going to hurt public safety, just take people from patrol. Patrol is the cornerstone of public safety in Yavapai County. Evidently, that's a bad thing to say now within the sheriff's office.
Why?
Because that doesn't appear to be their priority. And so, this is a more equitable utilization of funds, and there's many ways to enhance public safety.
Oh, it's about being politically correct?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. But I have it on pretty good authority that would not be a good career thing to say that patrol is the cornerstone. And I'll say it. Patrol is the cornerstone, followed closely by correctional staff, and I was one.
Well, if you don't have deputies or officers out there answering calls or intervening in crime, what do you have?
You have salary savings that you can buy cars and a Jet Bell helicopter and another SWAT vehicle and more furniture and a remodel of offices.
And that's what happened here in Yavapai County.
That's what's happening.
Okay.
That's what's happening.
And who's the decision maker on how and where to spend the funds?
So, running for office, I'd like to put all of the blame on the sheriff, but that wouldn't be true. And I'm not going to lie. He's got his hands fully in it. But the Board of Supervisors also.
This is the County Board of Supervisors?
The County Board of Supervisors also greenlight these budgets.
How many of them are there? More than 10?
I think there's 8, but I'm not sure.
So basically it's between the sheriff and the Board of Supervisors to decide where the money goes?
Because, he makes his case to the board. The board has to balance priorities, and then they give him a budget. And then monies that aren't spent can be utilized in other ways. And that's where salary savings becomes a slush fund.
Mm-hmm.
And so
we should never have a system where you are incentivized to take pay away from police in order to get a bonus for admin.
Sure. I want to be fair, though. I'm not talking about a literal bonus because that would sound like something different. I'm talking about utilizing it to buy zoom zooms and wham whams, which is a prison slang for stuff that's not important.
Yeah.
You've got multiple non-sworn positions doing the job that I did as a chief deputy with a much larger agency and a much larger budget. Mm-hmm. But I did it. I forecast attrition. I forecast how many hires we're going to need. I put together income outgo flows versus budget. I looked at each line item to make a decision. Is this software worth purchasing? Is this going to pay a dividend to the department in regards to lowering workload? Is this going to give officer greater awareness? Or is this just somebody that had a slick marketing scheme that's friends with somebody in the agency or somebody close to me?
Yeah.
And so I'll just say, I don't want this podcast to be about my campaign, but something that I have done and something that I would do as sheriff is every single line item in the current budget I will examine. And if there's not a public safety benefit or nexus to it directly, there'll be a line around it or a circle around it, and that's going to get deleted. And I will ask the board to retask dollars. Well, first of all, I'll stop abusing the authority I have. I'll fill those positions. And then if we feel that we need more positions, then I would retask the money to build those positions. Or do something quite unheard of is you just don't ask for as much money.
No, that would be an interesting
Right.
way to solve the problem.
Right.
Now, would you have the authority to do that, or would that authority and those decisions have to go through the board and get their approval in order for those things to change?
Yeah, the board's going to have their fingerprint on it. However, you could imagine that it would be a very tough road for the board to impose ancillary purchasing that they don't even know what these things are, right? They're counting on the sheriff's expertise to tell them what he needs or she needs.
I see.
And so do they care about a public information officer? Do they care about non-sworn staff advocating for YCSO or legislation in Phoenix, which we do have? Do they care about the spokesperson for these other ancillary made-up positions that are now parasitically attached to their budget? Probably not. But if I'm attempting to broaden my consensus outside the law enforcement community and bring in healthcare and mental health services, all these things are super lucrative, right? Big money associated with these things. If I want to build a consensus, because then these people will stand up for me when I have further ambitions.
Are you talking about bringing those types of services into the county for county employees to utilize? What are you talking about?
I'm talking about, so
mental health professionals for what purpose?
So let me rewind just a tad, because I saw this happen in California. So I started my career in law enforcement as a correctional officer at Soledad State Prison. And then I was a correctional sergeant. And then the last position I held at Soledad State Prison, I was what's called a sergeant over administrative segregation, the prison within the prison, or the jail within the jail. The folks that are the most difficult to manage, they'd come hang out with me in ADSEG and my crew. And so there were things that were beginning to happen in California. And basically, Arizona is like 15, 20 years behind Arizona as far as the symptoms of these things. Some things are closer to California. Some things are catching up. And so basically, sociologists, psychologists, social workers, community organizers, people fighting for social equity, most of them are my enemies, actually, they got the governor's ear. I said, hey, man, doesn't it make sense to make investments early to get people off that track of crime? Make investments early, and then we'll reap the law-abiding dividend. One person less in prison how many people could go to college, right? These kind of.
So they're trying to preempt crime through mental health avenues or something along those lines?
It's happening. So here's where the gap between California and Yavapai County is maybe even Yavapai is even further left. Maybe it's upside down than even San Francisco. So there's a thing called pretrial diversion that happened. It's happened. Google pretrial diversion, Yavapai County. Pretrial diversion was the holy grail of leftist Marxists who believe that we have a completely racist and oppressive criminal justice system, and there's no value to it, and it should be torn down. It was born out of San Francisco, and the idea was that if you're a drug offender, it's not your fault. You have a disease, not a criminal justice problem. And that why burden the criminal justice system with the drug addict, even though you're raping and hurting people and robbing and violence and vandalism, all sorts of other things associated with you. And then, oh yeah, by the way, you're also using drugs, right? And so the idea is that you would, officers, you're acting, let's make up a particular scenario that's happening right now. And Walgreens in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. Walgreens are closing all their San Francisco stores because it's so violent. Theft is so out of control. The violence, the theft, the beatings, the threats, the vandalism, unsustainable there, right? So Walgreens is pulling out. But nonetheless, if you look at Walgreens violence in San Francisco, you'll get the phone book of videos. And so scenario one, Andy goes to Walgreens in San Francisco and knocks an old woman in the face.
Unlikely.
However, bad Andy. And
Okay.
And we'll make her Asian, by the way, because there's a string of anti-Asian violence going on in San Francisco, street violence. And you snatch her purse, and through some miracle of fate, you fall into a police car, and you're caught. Okay, because they're not making much effort in San Francisco anymore to arrest anybody.
Yeah.
And trust me, I was working the Tenderloin in 2012 in an undercover role, and imagine me with long red hair and a much longer beard than yours back then, and it still didn't work for me. But nonetheless,
That sounds fun.
oh yeah, I got great stories about that, but maybe over beers.
That'd be great.
So, and so scenario A, Andy does it and gets caught, falls in the police car, and they pursue it to your arrest. You're searched, and you spontaneously state what you did. You're taken to jail, and you're potentially prosecuted, right? And scenario B, though, pursuant to your arrest, I'm searching you up and find a crack pipe in your pocket. Ooh, and that is a charge, right? But there's a screening portion after you're booked. There's a counselor associated with the jail.
Literally? There really is?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You have some homework, brother. There's some homework here.
I guess
Complete
so.
Care and Spectrum, they are doing the screening and the delivery of here in Yavapai County right now since 2019.
In Yavapai County they're doing this?
This was the wet dream of San Francisco leftists. They couldn't pull it off. It happened here.
So when you're talking about me going in,
I'm using the example of what
the Walgreens pushing the Asian lady.
Yes, in San Francisco. This is what they couldn't get it done in San Francisco.
So
they got it done here.
So if I go and do that here in Yavapai County,
You're going to get screened. If you've got a crack pipe, you're going to get screened for pretrial diversion. And
so
you know
that
what
means that I have a problem and it's not my fault that I committed that crime?
You have a disease. It might make you eligible for SSI. Try that
SSI?
on.
What is
Social
that?
Security insurance.
What?
Yeah. Or I guess it would be SSD. Social Security Disability. I'm not kidding.
Wow.
I'm not kidding. They're being screened for it. This is happening. I don't know what the outcomes on the SSD thing because that's a federal roll-up.
There's a lot of drug users. There's a lot of rehabs up here.
Oh, yeah, we can get into that because I can tell you it's growing, and I'll tell you why, too. But it's going to get worse. So this is all happening without the conservatives here in Yavapai County understanding it. Sheila Polk, 2019, she was the county attorney. Hey, this is a great thing. Our sheriff thought it was a great thing. The whole
Really?
team, yeah. Thought it was a great thing. Presented on it. And so when law enforcement's saying, hey, yeah, we can spend these resources better. So what happens is you get screened, and if you're found eligible for pretrial diversion, you double promise. I mean, I make you put both hands up that you're going to go do the 3-month program at the Harry's House of Heroin, right? With no outcome measure on what happens after you graduate. I expunge. The district attorney doesn't prosecute you. It didn't happen.
So double promise, meaning that there's not any kind of proof that I have to bring back.
No, you're going to have to bring a certificate.
Oh, okay.
That another drug addict, reformed drug addict that's working there. And no disrespect, I'm not anti-rehabilitation or anti-program.
Of course not.
I'm just not. Here's an example in California.
You shouldn't trade rehabilitation for crimes committed.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Here's an example about rehabilitation in California, and I'll come back to this because I want this. California is a great cohort. It's a great example because there's so much data and the numbers are so huge. And so from a behavioral science standpoint, people like to pull that and examine what happened. So I knew this anecdotally. I've been to a lot of these drug rehab programs. They're just awful, right? They're awful for the people that are going there. It's a money-making scheme. The way it works is a contractor gets a state contract to deliver rehabilitative services across the state. It could be you and me that stand up a fancy website and say, we're going to be the middleman, and then we're going to go out and find subcontractors to go deliver the services. Of course, we can't deliver it. So we're going to go find everybody in the phone book. And there are people who go, well, you know what? I could convert my house, and I could probably get 3 people in this room, maybe 4, because I could have 2 bunk beds.
Like a halfway house?
Yes. And then I'll have somebody here delivering YouTube videos on rehabilitation.
And that qualifies?
Yes.
Really? Like, seriously?
Brother, I've taken people out against their will out of those places, right? I did this for 20 years in California.
Man.
And so there's a nexus here back to Yavapai. So as I'm promoting through the organization, I'm realizing, like, holy moly, this is bizarre, man. The secretary of the Department of Corrections, $300,000 job, and a cabinet level member of the governor's office. His secretary just was hired. His secretary, the secretary's secretary. Does that make sense? He's the secretary of the Department of Corrections, and he has a secretary that types letters, right? It gets a little confusing. She just got hired by GeoCare, one of the largest was a private prison provider. Now is one of the largest private rehabilitation contractors, middlemen in California. He's got hired as an executive, she went from making $40,000 a year to $240,000 a year. And then we find out, the secretary of the Department of Corrections married his secretary.
Ah.
So who do you think the decision maker, who influenced the contract that was given to the GeoCare that has the secretary of the Department of Corrections wife working on the board?
Yeah.
This is literal. This was 4 secretaries ago for the Department of Corrections. First name Scott, if anybody wants to research it.
This kind of thing happens all
All
the
over
time.
place. This is how the cake is baked. This is how influence is peddled. This is how civil servants become rich.
Yeah, isn't this what happened with Pelosi's?
Oh, yeah, on steroids, yeah.
Something along that?
Yeah, they're insider trading and, oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So GeoCare then goes out and hires hundreds, if not thousands, of subcontractors that are literally, and I'm at the time as a gang agent, as a parole agent, on task force, looking for folks that are on the run or checking up on people, whatever. I'm going into these burned out homes, thinking, how the heck did they possibly get a certification to deliver services here? And they've got on the wall some broken picture with some sort of license on it that allows them to deliver rehabilitative services. So I knew this was a fraud. And so as I moved further up in the organization, I began demanding that when I was back into parole, that the programs that parole had a linkage to, because we were referring people to programs, had an outcome measure. In other words, like, hey, over the next 3 years, what's the likelihood they use drugs again or get arrested again? Or, hey,
Okay.
Because there are some programs that I was interacting with that had really good results.
So some real accountability.
Some real accountability and motivational training. And you've got a culture of people holding each other accountable, and they build relationships that extend beyond their rehabilitative treatment. And there's some good outcomes. Like, I saw it.
Well, it definitely sounds like you're not anti-rehab.
I'm not.
You're pro-rehab.
But simultaneously, I would go to some places where I'm like, man, there's a gun in here. And this is like, I might get attacked by the people here, right? And so the Office of Inspector General in California did a report in 2018 studying the effectiveness of the billions of dollars that California spent on rehabilitation. And I thought to myself, oh man, the Office of Inspector General, there's an appointee at the top of that organization. They're gonna say that this is working. And the governor's office gets money through fake pass-through organizations all the time.
Yep.
Silicon Valley stands up, like CEO stands up some, anti death row initiative, right? And the pass-through gives the governor's office money, and then in response, the governor pressures the state of California entities to purchase software from the company that.
Yeah.
Right, this is the triangle.
Yeah.
This is how
Well,
it
this
works.
is just like I was talking to a guy running for state senate the other day, talking about special interests.
Yeah.
That's the exact same thing as
It
special
is.
interests. Like, I donate to your fund,
Yeah.
and then when you're in your campaign fund, and then when you're in, you scratch my back.
Right.
But it would be
It's implied.
illegal. It would be illegal for me to pay you to do this thing.
Exactly.
But
Like-
it's the same freaking thing.
It's exactly pay to play, man. And they're real skillful about why they create plausible deniability and cover. And, they got burner phones and other proton mail, email accounts to hide what they're doing, right? As conservatives have to start doing as well, because the machine, which I have observed, the machine, thank you, the machine is more sophisticated than most people know in regards to data harvesting.
Yeah.
It's a real deal.
Yeah, it is.
And I can talk about that a little bit too later, but a lot of little checkpoints we got to come back to. So I tell this whole story to say that there's an allegory here. Yavapai County pulled off what San Francisco couldn't do. Pretrial diversion was birthed in 2019, went live in 2020, and crime in 2020 and 2021 and 2022 went up. And don't trust me, go to the Arizona Department of Public Safety's website. Type in this, Arizona Department of Public Safety, violent crime. It'll take you to their portal that aggregates data. You can say Arizona, you can say Maricopa County, you can say Yavapai County, you can go by agency. And you can see that Yavapai County through 2022 breaks with the rest of the state, quite frankly, the rest of the country. And crime went up. 23, which is bizarre because the numbers really shouldn't be collated yet. So I don't think the 23 numbers are solid. Shows a dip down. Kind of looks like this kind of shape, a little dip.
Mm-hmm.
I think the 23 numbers may be premature because, as you know, when you're trying to collate data takes a while to catch up.
Yeah.
So there'll likely be a revision to it. So the website even says don't pay attention to current year data previous year data because it hasn't collated yet.
I'll put a link in the notes to that website.
Yes, very, very easy. And you can filter by crime type, by year, and by county. Mm-hmm. Awesome tool. Play with it. Go back in time.
Is this different than the active crimes map?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Heat map.
Yeah.
The zip code. Yeah.
Yeah, those are great.
Those are fantastic. Yeah. I'm sure realtors probably should be using that a little bit more too, but nonetheless. So the allegory is here. It happened. And now people are being screened. And the signal that would be recidivism is gone because the crime didn't happen because it was expunged. Now it's a cumulative trauma to the body. In other words, I should lose some weight. I don't eat very well. I probably have some thickening of arterial walls, but so my bad eating doesn't kill you in one day, but then the symptom arises. And so when you assault the criminal justice system with these kind of things,
it slowly
catches up to you, and we're going to see the signal of that. And this is a result of an agency head that began looking at everything other than public safety and patrol density and jail staffing, and beginning looking outward at what might be cool and looked as progressive. And cool and progressive doesn't really work in Yavapai County, in my opinion. But the voters are behind the learning curve on this because this is something that they're exposed to. And so that's one of the reasons I'm running. I didn't hear anybody talking about this. It wasn't lost on me that I was going to have to answer questions about California. I mean, believe me, the moment I cross the border, I get rid of those California plates, right?
Yep, wise.
And so, but because I reached out to some folks and within the GOP and they weren't interested, and I started talking, and I'm like, hey, there's a problem. There's a problem here that I'm seeing. And I lived this for years, studying this. I thought, well, hey, look, I'm gonna minimally bring some attention to this through this campaign vehicle.
Yeah.
And then things have gone much better than I have expected.
I think one of the shortcomings of people in Arizona in relation to the whole California issue is that we see what's happening over there. We see a lot of the problems it's creating, and we obviously don't want that kind of stuff to come here because we do hold the spirit of America. Mm-hmm. We do hold that freedom dearly.
Right.
And I think one of the shortcomings of the people is that they see those issues and then they automatically place those issues upon all individuals that come from that region, which is obviously not the case.
What I'm hoping to get across is I should be thought as a Cuban refugee. These are the most liberty-loving escapees from Cuba because they saw what Marxism brings.
Yeah.
And I saw it up close and personal where I got to smell this guy's breath. And
Karl Marx?
I have another name for him that is born out of the Omen series because that's really the aura that's given off of that governor's office.
That's a creepy movie. You're talking about Gavin Newsom, right?
Yeah, and I'm telling you, I'm only 10% kidding. Like, I saw. Can I tell you a couple stories about
Bring it on.
that? So, COVID. So, I am literally at, where was I at? I was at Universal Studios on like February 1st. No, it was January like 28th, I think, something like that. And I was at Universal Studios. I had just been promoted to
2020.
2020. Yeah, thanks. I'm doing a lot of those, leaving some stuff out. So I'm glad you're keeping me there. So I had just been promoted to assistant deputy director of parole. I was a chief deputy. I promoted to assistant deputy director of state parole. Eventually was deputy director. It's confusing, all the different made up titles over there, right? For
Hey, at least actual people are filling those
yeah,
positions.
that helps. Yeah, and I was. It was the night, to give the exact date, I think it was the State of the Union address. So probably January 28th-ish is probably pretty close. And my wife and I were watching it, and the COVID was mentioned, the China virus was mentioned, right?
China virus.
And it hadn't really hit the United States yet. And I wasn't really tracking it, although I had seen some videos of people at bus stops twitching and falling down. Did you ever see any of those coming out of China? Yeah. So I was like already programmed, oh man, those Chinese communists over there, they release something and they're hiding it, right? And so my official position started, new job started February 1st. So I come back to my new, off this little vacation to my new job. And so I'm there for 16 days or 15 days. And the deputy director at the time gets a call from the secretary's office, Secretary of the Department of Corrections, and says, hey, we need you in an emergency meeting right now. And or need you and Doug in an emergency meeting right now. So my boss says, well, hey, we were going to go out to Enterprise Information Systems. It's a technology center that houses law enforcement data, archives it. We're going to talk to their leadership over there about access. And so the secretary says, okay, so send Doug, you go do your thing. So I don't really know what it's about. I mean, what is this about? You know, it's unusual, these type of emergency meetings. I mean, they happen, but so I go to it, and we're sitting literally around a huge oval wooden table, and there are like 20 directors and deputy directors sitting around this table.
From different counties in California?
No, they're all state government employees.
Okay.
Leadership.
And what
prison.
Facility were you meeting at?
At the 1515 S Street in California, which is the headquarters for the California Department of Corrections.
Got it.
And so we're sitting down, and there's confidential documents that are handed out to all of us. And the document is a document that's produced by FEMA and by the Office of Emergency Services in California. The Office of Emergency Services in California is basically FEMA and the National Guard combined, representing those kind of interests in California.
So the First Reich and the Second Reich.
Yeah, very dangerous. In fact, we met at an underground nuclear facility. I have a beautiful facility right outside of Sacramento. And it was like when I would go there, you'd get temperature scanned. It was like something out of a movie. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Right? Really interesting. So, and it talked about the forecasts for COVID. And there was a lethality number, and there was another thing called R0, which was the way things spread, how the likelihood of things spreading. So in one person, R0 of 4, you could infect 4 more people, and the lethality was listed at 10% on this confidential document, right? And I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh my God.
10% lethality, meaning if you catch it, it's a 10% likelihood you will die?
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty low.
No. Why? No. Look at any disease. 10% death rate we may not have a nation right now because people, panic. The panic, things break down, just-in-time delivery, power plants, water purification, right? If there's a 10% chance you're going to die on a trip to going to Phoenix, would you go? No.
Maybe. It depends on what the reason is.
Sure, but you get my drift that there's a 10% rate. Like, what's your chances of dying from the conventional flu? What was your real chance of dying from COVID? 0.001, not 10%.
That's the difference?
Right. COVID,
wow.
The real lethality of COVID was like, for you, was as close to zero as you could be.
Right.
I mean, it was completely exaggerated,
I'm
inflated.
thinking 10% out of 100, right? So
10 out of 100 dead.
right, and if you blow that up to the whole nation, you have 300 million people.
35 million dead, and probably
35 million
100
people.
million hospitalized. Right? You got 35 million dead. It's 10 times that go to the hospital.
Okay, so comparatively with diseases,
Anything
10
else
is
we've
very
ever
high.
experienced, yeah, they were advertising privately behind the scenes that this is doomsday.
Do you know what like the Black Plague would be, or any?
The Black Plague probably wasn't, maybe was 10%. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't want to speak out of.
I'm just trying to get a clear understanding.
But the Black Plague did kill, a significant chunk of Europe. So,
right.
So, but in our new modern society, man, it wouldn't have survived it. So I'm digesting this in real time, this document. So the secretary says out loud, hey, we've picked a COVID liaison to run our agency's response on COVID. And in the room, there's a buddy of mine who ran the Office of Correctional Safety. And the Office of Correctional Safety took on these type of assignments. When we had H1N1 that hit the prison system, right? Office of Correctional Safety. When there were fires, Office of Correctional Safety. So I'm texting my buddy at this tape, and he's on the other side of the table. Hey, dumbass, guess who's up, right? Because it's him, right? And I'm kind of making fun of him, like this is going to be a really awful assignment, and it's coming to a town near you, And so the meeting breaks, and evidently the person's going to be notified right after the meeting, right? So the secretary says, hey, Doug, can I talk to you for a minute? So, yeah, sure thing. And I'm thinking, I used to run the state's fugitive teams for several years, and he had some interest in reviving and putting some more budgetary stuff into the team. So I thought he was going to ask me my opinion about it. And he'd go back to the office and realize what a much nicer, huge, gargantuan office he has versus my office. I'd never been in his office before. And he sits me down and goes, hey, Doug, I want you to be the COVID liaison. And what? You want me to be the liaison for the Department of Corrections on COVID? I mean, wouldn't it be... I've never shied away from work. I mean, the boss asked me to do something, I'm going to go get it done, right? Take out the trash, arrest somebody.
So they already knew you and your work ethic and your work history, roughly?
I still don't. I wonder if they did believe the hype at the time, that it was 10%. And I was the only Republican appointee in the whole mess of these folks. And I wondered, I don't know. They told me it's because, oh yeah, you're so smart and better, right? But
I think maybe they wanted a
I was
fall
just
guy.
as disposable, built in,
Disposable,
right?
that's it.
I don't know. I want to know how this worked out. I never did get the answer. So I am in shock, right? I'm like, well, if it's not going to be the Office of Correctional Safety, I'm over the parole division. Most of the lion's share of the COVID liaison's responsibility would be over the prisons, which I do not have authority over. Oh, we're giving it to you.
So this is about being in charge of the prison systems and the parole and law enforcement internally, kind of, rather than how you're going to engage with the public and enforce?
All of it.
Oh, it included that too.
All of it, from nursing to testing to screening to policies.
To emergency mandates
to
and curfews.
mandates and vaccination later on, and masks and testing and PCR and, oh my goodness. And so I protested just a tad. I'm like, boss, I'll take on any assignment to help the organization and public safety, but I mean, do you really think that people are going to respond to me? I'm an outsider. Parole? I'm going to be telling all these folks. Now, I worked in the prisons. I think I shared with you, I was sergeant at Soledad, but, and so they wrote a memo, it's online, appointing me the COVID liaison. And literally they sent it before I left the secretary's office, and the emails that were coming to me, I need time off. What do I do about my kids? Hey, what do we do when we arrest somebody to think that has COVID? How do I get time off for this? I mean, it was just the floodgates of policy questions. It was impossible. And so the next weekend, we stood up a department operations center. You see, like when there's a fire or there's any national emergency, there's a FEMA operations center. We really mirrored that on the second floor of the Department of Corrections building in downtown Sacramento. It took over the whole floor. I had unlimited access to ancillary staff, and our job really was
ancillary being whatever you
support
needed.
staff, anything I needed, right?
Okay.
And And so, fortunately, my wife was a public health nurse during H1N1.
So she became part of your staff?
And unofficially. And I've always been very skeptical of vaccination, and I've always had the sense that the government might use a pandemic as an impetus to grab power. And they certainly
which
did.
is the Hegelian dialectic.
Exactly.
Right? They create a problem, we react to it, and then they offer us a solution.
Right.
Playing right into what they want.
Right. So, so come to find out, healthcare for the Department of Corrections has no tracking mechanisms to roll up outcomes for the different prisons. Unbelievable. Like I'm uncovering layer of problem to roll up data and make policy decisions in regards to what we're going to do. So we had a doctor that was like our head CCHCS doctor at the time, California Correctional Care System doctor. And he was talking about mask efficacy. This guy was right over the target, man. This guy was so over the target. He was so ahead of his time. I'm glad this guy was on my team early, combined with my wife, because he's like, hey, man, because we were talking about masking early in the prisons. We chopped down a lot of trees and a lot of T-shirts and turned them into masks. But
not in California.
Oh yeah. And so what he said early on was there's almost 0% efficacy
for the masks.
For the mask, it's actually a negative because there's a respiratory burden, and that any airborne virus, people have this idea.
And this is early 2020. This
is like
this
February 24th. It's like the week after we start the DOC up. We're bringing in staff to help this. This doctor is like an advisor on what we should be doing, and he's like, yeah, it's like the virus is not in droplets. So where I'm not against hand sanitation, but this is the virus is in the air, and it's these micron size things, and then if you under the electron microscope, even the N95 mask, right? It's like a tiny little fly going through the fibers of the mask. It'd be like analogous to taking gravel and throwing it at a chain link fence. And this is in the best case scenario with an N95. And so it'd be like 2% efficacy. The whole mask thing was sold to the public, was driven out of the governor's office as a lucky rabbit's foot. Like, if I have the mask on, I can continue being a good slave in California, right? Essential workers, to include restaurant workers, right? Wearing the mask, lucky rabbit's foot, had probably overall negative impact on outcomes in California. The next thing was, we didn't have experience and it's on the California Department of Corrections website, but I don't think we had our first COVID, and I'm going to be careful with this term, related death. You're familiar with the terminology behind related versus COVID death? Like, you die of COVID, it's because you had pneumonia and you drowned basically in your own fluids, right? Or respiratory stress, it caused.
But meanwhile, hospitals are still getting extra money for those COVID-related deaths.
And the state did too.
Okay.
The state dipped into that FEMA money. So immediately CCHCS.
So that real quick, that incentivizes these medical facilities to report incorrectly, to say it's COVID related.
Guy is stabbed 4 times in the chest with an inmate manufactured weapon. Take a bunch of plastic stuff, melt it in a crack of between 2 pieces of concrete, sharpen it on the ground, stab him, then throw him off the 3rd tier. But he died of COVID, right? Because he had a positive PCR test post-death. This is the stuff we were fighting with about the reporting, because I'm like, hey, I need to understand the burden on medical, right? Versus you guys trying to launder more FEMA reimbursement. And, man, the resistance we got to tracking. So anyway, long story short.
So you're trying to sift through a bunch of false data, half fake data.
And so they relieve the doctor who says, hey, PCR test, bullshit. PCR test is amplifying the virus particles like a Xerox copying machine. And the FEMA guidelines for the amplification are 41. So this was the number at the time. And that the inventor of the test said it's never should be used for what it's being used for. And if you're ever going to use it for something like this, you don't amplify over 20. Or you can test this glass of water and amplify it enough and you will find COVID in it. It's bizarre. It's true. And so our false positives are running at about 50%. Like even the guys that are, clearly run over by a truck or thrown off a tier or burned alive in a cell, they're testing these folks and listing it as a COVID death. And I'm saying, no, you're not, because I have visibility of all the comorbidities of each person who died. But long story short, So the first year of the pandemic, I expected 12,000 inmate deaths because it was a population of 120,000 and 10% death.
Mm-hmm.
Should have been 12,000 inmate deaths, and then plus lung disease and old age and Parkinson's. I mean, literally, these are people are dying in prison, for vast majority for natural causes. We would average in the California Department of Corrections about 400 deaths a year. And in 2020, we come up with 440. Now, I'm sure threat that did kill some people. It certainly did, but no different likely than H1N1. And so it was disgusting power grab. And the California Department of Corrections spent in 2020 about $1 billion on the COVID.
This doctor that said that the masks have almost zero efficacy,
Yeah.
did he hold any sway in whether or not the masks were forced?
No, he was fired.
He was fired because he didn't go along with
He didn't go along.
what
He
they
was
wanted.
replaced with a guy who was so left of left that we had an argument about. There was an anecdotal story. We had vicious fights. It almost paralyzed the whole program because we were arguing about how we were going to stat. And there was a guy who died on a motorcycle somewhere, and the county coroner statted him as a COVID death. He died from the motorcycle accident. And so I mentioned this as an example. I'm trying to find some common ground. Hey, is there anything that you think is out of bounds? And he says, how do we know that the COVID didn't blur his vision and impair his judgment? So, oh, yeah. And that's when you're like, oh, man. So anyway, thank goodness I was also
willfully ignorant.
Yeah, I was promoted out of that position.
They're not even ignorant. They're intentionally putting aside facts.
Yeah.
In order to achieve what, more money?
So imagine, this is my theory, right? This is I want to separate this from the correctional law enforcement science facts that I've been spitting versus Doug's personal theory on human beings, right? So,
well, what incentive would a coroner have to be labeling something as that,
well,
unless they've been incentivized to do so?
Instructed to. But I'll go a different route. So think about public health. What do you call the director of public health? I guess that's their title generally, the director of public health. Civil service position. Before COVID, had you ever seen one on television?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. So the director of public health, and I'm sure there's maybe 5 or 6 good ones across the country, but a lot of them are the director of public health because they couldn't be a doctor someplace else, right? Do you want to be a doctor? Do you want to be the director of public health making $85,000 a year, or do you want to be on staff at Yavapai Regional, right? Making, I don't know what they make, 200. All the prestige that comes with that. Mm-hmm. So, you should be skeptical of civil servants, right? because most of us could not do the same thing in the private sector. And unless you have a particular calling, I had a calling for public service in law enforcement. It interested me, right? But you should be skeptical of anybody who's wealthy in public service because the system's not designed to make you wealthy unless you pimp yourself. So imagine you're the director of public health of County X, and I come running to you early in 2020. What should we be doing? Should we be doing more? You've never had this much attention on you in your entire life. Nobody has ever cared what you said or did or what your office was doing, right? And all of a sudden, there's a race amongst public health officials who can be the most progressive, who can be asking for the public to do the most backflips, the most genuflecting, The mask was a symbol of submission,
Yes.
not a medical device.
Yeah.
And these people know what they did. And then, this is how things ended for me with the COVID assignment and the Department of Corrections, right? Excellent career, never had a blip, really blessed. So the governor, Gavin Newsom, orders all first responders that are state employees, which my agency was, they will be vaccinated as a condition of employment. And to add insult to injury, the governor's office, one of their minions calls me and says, "Hey, Doug, you've been selected as well as like 12 other agency heads, like the DMV, director of DMV, and CHP, chief of C. All these folks are relatively high ranking. We're all going to get vaccinated on television as a symbol."
Fuck you.
That's what I said. I said, "Fuck off. There's 0% chance I'm getting vaccinated. And what is this shit about you're going to fire people for not engaging in a medical procedure?"
So if we back away from all the COVID stuff just for a second, what authority does a governor have?
They don't. That's just it.
Okay.
It's the color of law.
Thank you.
They don't. It was against the law. In fact, I had gone on record and I had...
Is there actually a law that they're breaking by trying to force that upon people?
Well, there's a dozen of them, right? First of all, from HIPAA to extortion. I can't extort you to have a medical procedure to maintain your job. I mean, there's probably dozens.
Okay.
Right? And so I tell them basically eat shit, and I'm not going to discipline anybody for a vaccination that I'm not going to take within my agency. And we played a game of chicken. And this is where it goes back where you've built a good professional reputation with folks for decades, right? I was very popular amongst my peer group. And I'm very proud to say that the California Department of Corrections rescinded my division only, rescinded the order for vaccination contemporary with my retirement. They backed down because they knew that I was out of control at this point, right? And so I had been reaching out prior to my retirement. So I bought a house here in August of 21.
Here in Arizona?
In Yavapai. Mm-hmm. And so before I retired December 31st. And so I'm reaching out because I've got the numbers. I also did a lot of study and a lot of communication on the Gavin Newsom's early release plans. They dumped about 70,000 people out early. Homicide increased by about 40% in California. Biggest criminal justice disaster of all time. Ever.
70,000 employees?
70,000 inmates released early.
Oh.
70,000, all within a tiny compressed time frame. Because of COVID, it was too dangerous for them to be in. Plus,
I remember that happening.
I was there. Tank tracks over my body. And so, I was getting really vocal. So I had reached out, I swear to you, I'd reached out to everybody from Tucker, Rachel Maddow, Anderson Cooper. I'm trying to think of the NBC host. Anyway, all the big ones, and then some smaller ones. That's how I got tied in with the Epoch Times. The Epoch Times was the only one that got back to me. Because they all have gatekeepers and, someone's in their mailbox and there's 10,000 emails. Epoch got back to me. And so they had me on California Insider, which is the Epoch Times. It's a subsidiary. It's a conservative whistleblower channel. I did some viral videos for them talking about this stuff.
Are those on your website?
No, because California Insider owns them. The Epoch Times articles, the written articles I've done, I do for them, they license me to use however I want.
Oh, okay.
So then you can download those for free at eckenrodforsheriff.com. That's just right below my petition signature button that you can hit if you want to sign my petition to be on the ballot.
Ekenrod, the number 4.
Eckenrod,
sheriff.
The number 4 sheriff. I've got a campaign vacancy.
Yeah. Hey, man, people are out there. People want to help. People want change. Don't be afraid to ask.
Right. So you can download those for free. They're in PDF. And the Hegelian logic one, the Eisenhower's right, Arizona's in trouble. Did you like the pandemic one that I wrote?
I didn't read it.
Oh my goodness!
I started to read it.
It is humorous, man. Even I was talking about my own material, but it was humorous because I do talk about the draconian. There was a law that would have placed doctors in jail if they shared that ivermectin or vitamin D might have been a helpful.
What? A law?
It happened, brother. It's signed into law. Now, the courts, after, I like to take some credit for it, after I wrote my article, there was a lot of attention that was drawn to it. Courts put a stay on that, but it was signed into law by Gavin Newsom, yes. Called the Medical Disinformation Act. Draconian. It is a fantasy of 1984, right? To be able to silence at that level. But that's the type of control they have to impose to keep control of the 8th largest economy in the world.
So they're
Yeah.
so they're lying and creating laws. So they're doing the opposite. I'm trying to figure out how.
Because the next pandemic, right?
Right.
I suspect that's what they're doing because they're wargaming disease X. I mean, there's all sorts of bizarre things. You're familiar with Bill Gates' tabletop exercises a few months before COVID?
Yeah.
Some very strange things, man. I don't claim to fully understand it, but it was the biggest transfer of wealth of all time. $12 trillion was printed. 1/3 of the money, of all money that's ever been created, was printed between 2020 and today. 1/3.
Of all money ever.
Ever. That money is still out in the ether because once it comes back into the economy, we'll really see what real inflation is about. But nonetheless, that's what's going on.
Yeah, Bill Gates is into a lot of weird stuff, buying up the farmland, messing with all.
Well, I'd love to have coffee with his wife.
Why is that?
Well, because remember she left him during the Epstein revelations.
I didn't know that.
Messy, real expensive, ugly.
Ooh.
And so I can only imagine that she might be. I'm sure she signed some non-disclosures for a couple billion, but nonetheless, I bet you she knows where the bodies are buried. That would be an interesting convo if she would have it.
Yeah, it sure would. Wow. Okay. All right. Well, let's see. Before we move into the sheriff stuff, I've heard a little bit about the prison industrial complex.
Yeah.
And this is the idea of there being private prisons, and the private prison lobbies legislators to write laws in order to make it easier to cycle people into the prisons, and they're paid per inmate.
Daily rate.
A daily rate per inmate. So, I guess, what did you see in your time in the corrections department?
So when I was working at Soledad, private prisons were still a thing in California.
Are they not now?
They're not now. It's been stopped.
So is the government receiving the benefits that private prisons were receiving? Are they the ones doing it now?
More Machiavellian than that.
Really?
Yeah.
Come on. We just can't win, man.
It's another article I wrote for Epoch called the Rehabilitative Industrial Complex.
Yeah.
So think about this, man. It costs, between the correctional officers union and lawsuits and all sorts of, man, it is expensive to incarcerate somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where's the profit? But man, if I'm a caring, compassionate person, and I send them rehabilitation in lieu of prison, I can push play on the YouTube video about how to do your ABCs and how don't do drugs and pack a house of 150 people in there. And I charge the state per body as well. So I can charge the state less money, but my overhead is so much less, it's more profitable.
Yeah.
And so whack and hunt becomes whack and hunt. There were several private prison manufacturers, companies that were running them.
Yeah.
A couple big names, Whack and Hunt.
That's a funny name.
Yeah, weird one. BI is another one. Corrections Corp was another one.
These are major prison
Big players,
lobbies.
multinational. No, these are actually the corporations. Multinational. Like if you ever played a Resident Evil game before, do you think of like an Umbrella Corporation? Just insert these names, right? And but they've got the message that, hey, the social justice things kicked in and they took advantage of it. They hijacked some of the ideas about rehabilitation and said, hey, we can just rebrand. And so now it's AmeriCare and GeoCore, and they changed their names. They literally rebranded, new logos. They had teams of people researching naming conventions that sounded more rehabilitation-esque. Changed their whole building business model, like what Blockbuster should have done at the end of when DVDs were dead, right?
Yeah.
So now they're managing many of the state's contracts, prison contracts for rehabilitative services, and many large county contracts as well. We have,
Evil people are smart.
dude, you know who got the contract for us here? I
In
think
Yavapai?
yeah,
No.
it's Complete Care. Complete Care. It's always that kind of name.
Yeah.
And they've got, intertwining letters and they pick colors. I mean, it's brilliant marketing strategy. I need to hire some of those folks to do some campaign logos for
Right.
me and stuff like this, right? and then they subcontract with Spectrum, who's I guess you call them technically a nonprofit healthcare delivery mechanism. And so anyway, you begin to see that there's a shift away from the physical incarceration into the virtual incarceration because it's so much more profitable. And then you can do it in the name of equity and social justice, because all those cops are doing is beating people up and wanting to take their lives away, right? That's what the left is saying. That's what the left is saying is they've so impugned my profession.
Yeah.
And they're paired with some folks who really believe it, and then the real sophisticated folks take advantage of it to move money to where they want it to be.
Even though they know it's BS.
They know it's BS. And then the really thing that's really sad in this whole thing is that there's a sweet spot. If you're studying corrections or criminal justice, you'll want to know this. Ed Latessa, he was a tenured university professor at the University of Ohio, and one of the pioneers on behavioral science in regards to rehabilitative efforts. And this is what Ed Latessa discovered through years of research and study, real science, not the
COVID science.
Not the COVID science. What he discovered was the worst thing that you can do to offenders is deliver them either subpar rehabilitative programming, or you commingle folks that are high risk and low risk together when they're getting their rehabilitative programming.
Yeah, like enabling them.
Yeah, so I didn't finish the thought, and it's tied into this about the Office of Inspector General in California, the billions of dollars, their 2018 report on outcomes. Mm-hmm. Between the billions of dollars spent, they found between a 0 and 1% impact on recidivism.
Wow. It's like the homeless thing.
It's exactly, in fact, anything you subsidize, you get more of, right? And,
yeah.
So, and that's an axiom you can take to the bank. Anything you destigmatize, you get more of. Anything. Find one example.
What do you mean? Do you have an example?
Yeah. Okay. You destigmatize childhood pregnancy. You destigmatize prison. You destigmatize homelessness. You destigmatize mental health. You destigmatize folks that are struggling with what their gender is. Anything you destigmatize, you get more of. Now, there's sometimes that stigma is not good, but stigma is a powerful social motivator.
Yeah, it's like cultural warfare.
Think about in Asia, right? In Asia, the stigma about committing crime. The stigma is so strong, that is a more powerful incentive or de-incentive to do crime than their whole entire criminal justice system together, right? Because it's so frowned upon.
Yeah.
I've been heavily involved in the martial arts for a long time.
Oh, what kind?
Kempo. And jiu-jitsu later in life. But,
cool.
But
do you train right now?
no, as you can tell.
Well, there's some big dudes in there.
I boxed at a pretty high level as an amateur boxer. I boxed in the police games.
Cool.
1-1. The guy I lost to the first year of first fight. It was kind of a pyramid scheme to fight. Lost to in my first fight. He went on to win the whole thing, and it was in Las Vegas. Large draw. Good.
Nice.
Good boxers. The next year I did a little better.
Right on.
But nonetheless, when the first school I went to as a kid was a Shotokan.
Oh yeah, we have one of those in Prescott.
Okay.
I know I know the guy there.
So as a 13-year-old kid, I'm looking up and there's all these weapons and black belts and pictures all around the wall of the building, and you would see on some of the pictures like be a class picture of all the folks that got their red belt or whatever it was, and you'd see one person that somebody took a magic marker to, and their face is blotted out, and you would see this dotted through all of these pictures. So
Interesting.
I couldn't help to ask, This really guided some of my principles later on.
And Shotokan is Chinese.
No, Shotokan is Japanese.
Is Japanese.
Japanese, yeah, more traditional open hand.
Oh, it's karate.
It's karate.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so the instructor said, "Well, these are people who dishonored the dojo, so they don't exist."
Whoa.
And so that idea, so like as a young man, I thought, man, I don't want to have my face blacked out with a magic marker. I don't want to be one of those guys.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to calculate the impact of that kind of pressure in regards to decisions for young men. Like I've made a lot of bad decisions. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, many of them were unrecorded, right? Yeah. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here. But nonetheless, there are a lot of things I didn't do because of the embarrassment.
Yeah.
What would my parents think? What would my neighbors think? What would my friends think? Right?
Social pressure.
Social pressure. And that kind of helps you get into those 27, 28, 29-year-old years where your brain is finally fully formed, right?
Yeah.
There's some good data on that. But back to Ed Latessa. Ed Latessa is like, hey, there are some studies that say that rehabilitative programs can make you worse. So referencing back to the Office of Inspector General report, between 0 and 1% recidivism, I'm thinking, well, I know there's some programs that are working. So to end up with like a 0%, you got to have some programs that are pulling down the average. Mm-hmm. So think about this. You're a brand new executive of a burger chain. You got 1,000 burger restaurants, right? You're CEO. It's a publicly traded company. All you care about is profit for the next quarter.
Yeah.
And your team comes to you and says, hey, boss, we're at 0% profit. And you're like, bullshit. I see there's 150 stores here that are making money. And I see there's 200 stores here that are losing money. Close the 200 stores that are losing money. Immediately you show a profit, stock price go up, right? That's how business is done.
Jeez.
Right? So wouldn't that be the approach that the California Department of Corrections or anybody else should have done in regards to rehabilitative programs? Because you should be tracking the data down to the program level, down to the individual who received state money. Mm-hmm. And you got Harry's House of Heroin that's underperforming, that people are recidivating at 8% more than the mean. Close it. But generally what's happened across the country is because it's become a political weapon and it becomes a pass-through to move money to people that are close to you. Mm-hmm. Friends, family, associates, people who are trading influence. In California, and it looks like to me, and Arizona as well, there are no outcome measures down to the program level, intentionally. So nobody can go, Harry's House of Heroin is not producing, close it, because it would impact contracting dollars. Mm. And brother, that's my message, is that there are some folks, there is a band of folks who could benefit from rehabilitative programming, yes, who are lumped in with a bunch of folks who are never going to respond.
Right.
And so they're both cheated.
Yeah.
And we pull some of these people that might have a desire to rehabilitate back into their criminal associations. And that hurts you and me. And that is another thing that's very important to me, that there needs to be a full accountability of every program that has a nexus to Yavapai County Sheriff's Office. There's got to be an outcome measure. And if the outcome measure does not show a benefit or a benefit that's associated with the expense, if I can cut it, it's gone. Or if I go to the board, I'm going to recommend that it's gone. And I'm going to share the information publicly because you need consensus.
Yeah, and you need people to pressure the board members to do what the people want, because this is our place.
Exactly.
This does not belong to the board members.
Right.
Just because you got the power of the pen in that position doesn't mean you get to make the decision. It means that you are a public servant, and you're serving what the people want.
I mean, you're basically, the analogy is, I'll be walking around with a flashlight, and I'm going to highlight every wart and every problem in an effort to remedy it, and maybe some pain up front, right? But that's the only way you get better.
Yeah,
and that's how you bring resources back to patrol and back to jail staff.
And in considering that kind of reform, you're talking about pain. I mean, legitimately, there's no pain in any of this.
Yeah. I will personally enjoy it, but yeah.
Right. I mean, if there's the pain that I can see is the trickle down effect to the deputies who get paid less or who get incentives, or not incentives, but like insurance cut.
Well, you think about it right now. What time is it? It's 8:00. There is somebody in an unincorporated area, miles from a major city, that's in a Yavapai County Sheriff's Office patrol vehicle right now that knows he doesn't have cover or she doesn't have cover
Right.
for 30 minutes.
Yeah, there's dozens of them.
Right. And that, by the way, you should know this. Sure, some folks will be upset that I have this information, but nonetheless, there's an exit polling that's been done because we don't necessarily have as much of a recruitment problem as we have an attrition problem. In other words, people leaving to go to other agencies.
Do you know the main reason?
Yeah, I do.
What is it?
Which surprised me. I expected it was going to be money. Early on, I expected it was going to be money. No, I'm working alone too frequently.
Yeah.
Why am I going to work for YCSO alone when I can go to Chino PD and have a cover unit
Yeah.
for the same money, or maybe a tad more? So, these are problems, and so you could actually solve some of your retention by filling the positions, and then you have a kind of a self-healing scenario here. You're slowing down the attrition. And it's a big cost saver because, paying for somebody to go to an academy and then onboarding them. And, it takes a couple years before a peace officer has really got his feet underneath him. And so it's very expensive on the front end. And so you don't want to be bleeding people all the time. And it's a huge burden on an agency. So it's another opportunity to make us more efficient, is by doing the right things. And in this, buried in this, I am not afraid to walk away from that grant money. If that's how I got to safely staff the organization, if I've got to pull some people back, then I will pull them back.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not about the staff.
Right.
It's about the people and the deputies.
Right.
All right. Well, let's move into the sheriff stuff.
Yeah.
Question 1. What is the role of the sheriff?
Boy, I think it's Section 41 of the Arizona Revised Statute covers that. But look, you're responsible for public safety in the community. Civil courts, there's jailing, people that expire, responding to complaints for service, right? Overall, you're delivering public safety to the citizens here. But I want to mention something that's not written in statute, right? That I think it used to be something that was obvious, something that we all took for granted, is the sheriff is the highest elected law enforcement official, highest official, in my opinion, that's elected in a county. And they're certainly the highest law enforcement official that's in the county. In other words, the FBI director could come here and they would have to bend the knee to the sheriff. Due process thrown out the window. Mass surveillance and data gathering done illegally, collecting no warrant.
Wasn't it made legal through the Patriot Act?
Not the data harvesting they did. They pulled anybody who spent money within a radius of the Capitol.
Yeah.
They got flagged. Anybody had a cell phone ping anywhere near the Capitol got flagged.
Did you know that they're reallocating air marshals to follow the people?
Yes.
And to investigate the people instead of being air marshals?
Right.
They're retasked to follow
right.
January
right
6th
when
people.
we're getting ready to cross swords with Iran.
Yeah, or not even people that were at the Capitol. These are just people that were in the vicinity.
Right. So you pull resources off of something that's going to have a nexus to no border, military age men speaking not Spanish, but Farsi, coming across the border, and no air marshal.
And Mandarin.
And scores of them. I was shocked at the numbers, honestly.
Yeah, it's pretty scary.
And the pictures show women and children, right? But you zoom out and it's 95% military age men. This is not a refugee crisis as being described. This is something different.
It was an invite.
But back to the sheriff's role, my personal belief system, fortunately, aligns with the constitutional sheriff. Liberty is the priority. My job as sheriff is to be as minimally involved in your life as possible. Further, I train staff and hold them to a high standard in regards to protecting your liberty. Not an overly officious person in uniform that's looking down at you. No, somebody that's there as your public servant, right? That understands that the color of authority in this agency is not acceptable. That, yes, it is legal to film in public. There is no expectation of privacy, and you do not have to surrender ID unless you are a suspect in a crime, right? Understanding the Constitution and the limits of the Constitution and your role as a peace officer from a constitutional standpoint makes your role as a peace officer so much easier. And it fights with the founding fathers identified early was that men are flawed, all of us. Mm-hmm. And you leave us to our own devices, and it ends up bad. And we see what happens all over the world. Ego and pride get in, and desires. But the Constitution serves like this North Star. Hey, liberty. As long as you're focused on liberty, even down to the patrol or correctional officer level, you have very important jobs because sometimes you have the authority to take liberty away within the confines of the law that are very specific. And so you've got to hold liberty paramount because there's many times you can't write a training memo on every potentiality of what you may encounter. Mm-hmm. But as long as your underpinning is liberty, you generally are going to make the best decision. So a little bit more specific. I noticed you're going to tease you about your Taurus a little bit. But
Oh, no, that's fine. I talk shit about it all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm a Glock guy myself, but nonetheless, I won't hold it against you.
It was an accident, okay?
Okay, I feel, well, yeah. Like my first marriage.
I'll tell you what happened. So once upon a time, I sold some guns because I needed money. And I realized I need to have something. Something's better than nothing. So I went and bought a cheap Taurus G1 9mm, made in Brazil, standard Brazil police weapon, right? And then I had a kid a few years later, and or it's like a year later or something, and I had learned that G1 didn't have drop protection, which means for people that don't know, if you drop the gun and there's a bullet in the chamber, it could shoot, like you see in the movies. Doesn't happen most of the time.
Like that SIG 320 is happening right now. We have that same problem.
Is that the 320?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the one that the military adopted.
Yeah. And so I ended up figuring that out and then going to just upgrade it to the G3, which is basically the same gun, but has drop protection. Yeah. It was a money thing. And then finally, when I got the money to do so, I bought the SIG P365, which
that's the move.
I love. I love it.
29 out of 30 days of the month, I've got a 365X on.
Right on.
But I also, the 19 is still pretty good.
Yeah. I've never shot a Glock, actually, and I've heard so much good stuff, but I don't like the way they look, and I don't feel they fit my hand.
Well, that second kind of cool is like important, the way it looks, so.
It is the second kind of
It is like, right. It's
pretty secondary, but the way it fits your hand, and just that SIG just does it.
Yeah, 33 parts, 10 for finish. It's pretty good. I'm a Glock armorer, and I'm pretty sold. I won the Steel Challenge last year in the law enforcement division here in Yavapai.
Cool.
And it was so fun. I ran a Glock Model 45 with it's optics ready. I run an SRO, Trijicon SRO on it with a 3-pound Black Aces disc connector on it. So it's not a race gun, but but I talked so much mess. Department of Homeland Security had sent a team up to compete. And this is like the first time in my life I've been called like grandpa, right? Hey, grandpa, how you doing, right? Like I'm this old guy. This has like happened so fast. I beat those guys. Boy, I talked so much mess. It was so merciless. It was so much fun. But on the topic of guns, so
being the sheriff.
Yeah. So, I've been involved in the shooting sports my entire life, but that's not why I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment's intended to keep the authority, the real power, the symbol of liberty in the location that it deserves to stay with. That's the citizenry, right?
Yes.
And that's what makes us different than
the whole point of the Constitution itself. The whole point of leaving Great Britain and becoming our own people.
And so So I've been ticked off about the assault weapons bills and magazine bans and all these different things. But, well, you know what scared me the most was, are you familiar with 80% lowers and pistol braces, that type of stuff? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when the Biden administration was installed,
yeah,
they immediately did what any good Marxist would do. They would fire anybody who's not on the payroll, right? And they installed a very pliable ATF director who immediately used his administrative authority, which is illegal to do. And he administratively said, oh, these are now felonies.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And you're going to have to testify against yourself, fingerprint, take pictures of your weapon, and gave an amnesty period with a financial penalty.
Well, that guy needs to get his ass kicked.
I
mean, why is that?
Dude, that's so bad.
How can people do that and be okay with themselves in doing that kind of
thing? And the courts,
do
there was a stay on the pistol brace deal now, but it took a lot to get to the stay, and the stay, it's not particularly durable, but nonetheless, mortified, right? Because all the things that they said are felonies are going to be felonies. Mr. Eckenrod owns in spades, right? And so, I'm never going to submit, irrespective of what happens to that type of tyranny. But it's illegal. I mean, it's beyond the Constitution. I mean, there are plenty of case law in regards to this. They don't have the administrative authority. But if they can do that, what can't they do?
Yeah.
And so,
well, this brings up one of the subjects that I talk about with everybody involved in law enforcement, politics, anything like that, is Marbury versus Madison, right? Mm-hmm. It set the legal precedent of any law created that is repugnant to the Constitution is null and void, which means that but regardless of that, these laws are still passed.
Yeah.
And in order to reverse that, it takes time, money, time in front of judges,
sure.
People. There's got to be a better way.
There is.
To manage.
There is. You get the right sheriff.
The rebellion of these laws. Yeah, that would be a way. Because the sheriff chooses whether or not to enforce certain laws.
But brother, that's not enough. Let me explain. So I'll go on record right now what my stance is and what people should hold me accountable to if they feel I'm not doing it.
My man.
Right? So, I've got two competitors in the Republican race. And they've made some statements in regards to not enforcing unconstitutional gun laws, which it's a good first step. That's not enough. So I'll make the commitment. I will not enforce unconstitutional gun laws, but in addition to that, I will not allow to be enforced unconstitutional gun laws. And what that means is DOJ, DHS, IRS, FBI, insert all of the three-letter federal entities that have been hijacked that should be described with a 1 4-letter word that starts with an F and ends with a... Anyway, so... And so within 30 days of taking office, to include state entities too, because I'm very concerned about what's going to come out of the state.
Yeah, and your own deputies, I would assume.
Well, I want to give them a guiding light, guiding direction, right, and how to interface with the public, is that we will not allow unconstitutional gun laws to be enforced. And if you're a federal or state entity conducting surveillance or arrest operations in Yavapai County, you cannot do so without an approval from the sheriff. And the mechanism to do that, when you're conducting an operation outside of your own area of command.
Yep.
If you're conducting an operation, period, you're going to produce something called an operational plan. Where, when, who. It deconflicts, it prevents blue on blue kind of problems. I've done thousands of them. Because as a state agent, I was always operating in somebody else's jurisdiction, making sure that dispatch and the local entity knew what I was doing. So myself and my team, because we're transitioning from undercover role, jumping out, executing a search warrant after we see somebody, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you got to let them know you're there, doing what you're doing.
And we're up on the radio, what channels and cars, where we're going to park, where we're going to approach, A, B, and C side. There's all sorts of thought that goes into...
So you write out the plan and submit it to them and say, hey, this is what we're doing.
This is what we're doing.
This is the full scope of it.
Yes.
Cool.
And we let them know when we clear and if we need assistance, mutual aid, things like that. So... And so if there's a nexus to an illegal, unconstitutional gun confiscation or surveillance because they think somebody's got a pistol brace, right? I'm not going to allow it to happen. We shut it down. And so your sheriff has got to be protecting and serving. And that protecting might come in the form of interfering with unconstitutional actions that are taking place in Yavapai County.
Excellent.
And I will be your canary in the coal mine, because if I disappear, there'll be a problem, and at least you'll know. And hopefully it's just a metaphor, right? But look, we're headed to some tough times. I'm very concerned.
Yeah, as am I.
Yeah,
it's pretty scary. Now, what's the ratio of political engagement versus law enforcement versus people management as the sheriff? What's how much law enforcement are you doing versus being a politician versus being a boss?
I'm reflecting back on my previous experience being an agency head. Obviously different, elected versus appointed. Mm-hmm. But unquestionably, this would be advice to anybody who wants to promote within a law enforcement entity, is you have got to fight the temptation to step away from the troops. The men and women in uniform are the core business. You got to protect them. You got to mentor them. You got to, when they may have a bump in the road that's not fatal to their career, you bring them back into the fold. Not looking to weaponize internal affairs. Internal affairs is the last resort, right? And so you have to continue to mentor and lead until the day you're done with that position as sheriff or director or chief or whatever it is, right? Obviously, there's a political component to it because you're dealing with a board, right? But this is the thing that I think I got a little chit in my pocket that is like a get out of jail card, right?
A chit?
A chit. It's like a little token.
Okay.
It's a jail term, by the way, too.
Oh, got it. Okay. We call it a coin.
Call it a coin. I don't plan on running for more than one term. Like when I retired, I wanted to be retired and right. I just was so pissed off about what I saw, and I couldn't get any traction with anybody about it. I'm like, F it, I'm gonna make a stink.
Well, if you become sheriff and things go well and you make changes that you're talking about, would you do more?
No. Well, this is what I'll say. This is what I want. I'm going to run, win, and work. And within the 4-year period of time, I want to identify some sergeants and lieutenants that are going to be the next chief deputy and next sheriff. And I want to train them and mentor them and really expose them to that guiding principle, that North Star of liberty and the Constitution as a litmus test to get my endorsement. Yeah. I'm happily retired. I'm running because I'm angry. And I'm also a little bit concerned, too, right?
Very concerned.
But I'd be more than happy to not have to worry about the political portion of this from a re-election standpoint.
Yeah.
No consensus necessary.
Well, exactly. You do a good enough job.
I can be a good maniac, fix this thing, and then I will be already from the first day. I'll be identifying, hey, who are the next folks in the cog they hand this thing off to, that are looking at this the correct way, and so they don't have ancillary motivation in regards to the contract delivery and who gets what where. So that's the plan, man, and so I want to maximize leadership, and I want to minimize politics, other than the type that I have to, what I have to engage in pounding Katy Hobbs, which I will do as frequently as necessary, maybe twice daily. Because
pounding as in shit talking.
Yes.
Sorry.
The other would not be an option in any universe.
That.
Yes. No.
So
funny.
We kind of touched on this a little bit, and I'd like to go into it into some depth. But the new Justice Center. My question is, how is the agency, the Yavapai County, currently failing? Is this more a
brother? You only brought me water, and now I'm going to talk about my favorite topic here. I need some whiskey to go with that, but
we can take a break.
Hey, twist my arm.
Cool.
Yeah.
Be right back. All right, we're back from the break. We're going to get into the Justice Center that cost $70 million in Yavapai County that apparently was unnecessary.
I better take 2 drinks before of my spiced Costco apple juice, right?
You don't have to say. Yeah, it's not whiskey. I'm sorry, guys, listeners. I know it's rum. That's all I had. I quit drinking as heavily let's see, like a month ago or so, and I've been going real light on the alcohol since then because
Yeah.
it's a slippery slope.
Yes.
But anyway, so this Justice Center, what was the initial purpose for this? Tell me what you know about it.
Okay, I'll tell it from my first person point of view, how I
got
found
it.
out about it, right? So I touched down in Arizona, in Yavapai in like August of 21. I technically retire physically off the books December 31st of 21. I joined the Arizona Rangers shortly afterwards. It's like, I don't want a job, but I want to do something.
Yeah.
Great organization, by the way. The Arizona Rangers is a very special gem that's highlighted in the Arizona Revised Statute. Gives folks of all backgrounds an opportunity to serve. And the people love the Rangers, and the Rangers love the people.
Yeah.
So, not a commercial for the Rangers, but it's a good organization.
It is.
So, it's just, it's a volunteer quasi law enforcement organization, as you know. And so I wanted to be able to contribute a little bit more. So I thought about, well, hey, I've got a lot of correctional experience, a lot of project management experience, a lot of budgetary experience. Hey, there's this new jail here. I talked to some folks. Hey, you should see if the sheriff would allow you to be a consultant, right? So I start researching the jail. And, there were some things that stuck out to me as a former California refugee, seeing the terrible contractual outcomes in California that were dwarfed. I'm going to give you the numbers. So I'm literally over at Best Buy and having a Apple CarPlay stereo installed in my car. I'm out at Chili's getting a burger on my iPad doing my jail research. And the story kind of goes like this. It looks to me like since about 2003, the Board of Supervisors and every sheriff has wanted a new jail. And the reasons for the new jail is advertised to the public were, hey, it's so expensive to transport people back and forth to Verde Valley. That's where the current jail is at. Verde Valley has, by the way, a population capacity of about 600. The sheriff's office reserves a percentile of beds for intake and classification, which is typical of any correctional system. So, and they attempted through the board, with the impetus, the request from the sheriff's office, attempted to get the voter to sign off on building a jail on multiple occasions through taxation, and it failed. And I think the most recent successful tax increase that was approved by the voter was the jail district tax, which, in a nutshell, changes the way that the jail daily rate is paid by agencies who book there on misdemeanor charges. Felonies are picked up by county, state. Misdemeanors are picked up by individual agencies. That's why you'll see individual agencies have different thresholds for arrest, because it costs them money to book folks. Are you familiar with this? Like, if you get a $1,000 misdemeanor warrant from Phoenix, they're probably not going to pay to have you extradited. It costs several $1,000s to bring you down, right? They're tell that son of a gun, give him a ticket, tell him to appear, right?
Yeah, I knew it cost money to extradite, but I didn't know that it costed money to incarcerate
right.
them.
So we moved to a different model, though. We disintegrated that model, and now it's kind of like everybody chips in through their taxation to build a jail. And so agencies, their own financial incentive to not book folks on piddly misdemeanor stuff.
Right. Save money.
And I'm talking real piddly, like trespass or failure to pay your parking tickets, right?
Yeah.
The financial penalty to book you is gone, because now it's just socialism. Just you're in with all the other agencies, right, and paying, and the citizens paying for it. So I'm not a big fan of this jail district tax concept, but nonetheless, they could not get the voter to fall for the need for the new jail. And like I said, the impetus for the new jail was, hey, we want to save money on transportation. It costs us money and people off the road to take them to Verde.
Since 2003, they've been trying to get a new jail.
Yeah, been trying to do this 20 years, 21 years now. So they did what every good bureaucrat does. And this plays, whether it's run all over California. If you want to stay the night at your buddy's house as a kid, who asks your mom if you can stay the night?
Me?
No, you ask your buddy, hey, ask my mom if I can stay the night. Ever do that?
Oh, no.
That game?
Yeah. Okay.
You bring in a surrogate,
Yep. A proxy.
a proxy. That's what Yavapai County Sheriff's Office did in collusion, in my opinion, with the board who wanted this, man, wanted it bad. So they went out and they procured somebody who was going to give them the report that they wanted. You're not going to go out and get a report from somebody who's going to say, oh, you don't need the jail. You could actually expand the current jail for 1/10 the cost.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to go out and get the person who's going to say,
They
hey.
give you the answer you want to hear.
So they go out and they hire Karen Chin.
Karen
Chin.
Chin.
Chin Consulting. Karen Chin is a criminal justice corrections consultant who hasn't met a project or a building or a good idea that she doesn't like. And so if you want a jail to deliver, the cutting edge rehabilitative services and psychiatric services that are going to help people get back on track at an unlimited cost, you go hire Karen Chin because she's going to write the report that says, hey, you need a $61 million jail. And so she made all sorts of recommendations about pretrial diversion to mental health screening on site to more rehabilitative services pre and post release. And you need the facilities to deliver them. And so hence has delivered the Karen Chin report that is shared externally as if it was like a federal oversight committee, like the feds or state government had produced a report with recommendations. No, they paid Karen Chin to produce a report that said to do all the things they wanted to do. This happened in 2016. And so I'm still not, I'm like, oh, well, this is what they did back in California. But I still hadn't gotten to the money shot yet, which was what they actually delivered. So they delivered at Taj Mahal, man. They've got a fantastic justice center. They've got rooms for crying. They got rooms for defense attorneys. They got rooms for public defenders. They got rooms for breastfeeding. They got a 600-man kitchen. They've got
600-man kitchen.
Yeah.
Activity over there.
There's activity. What they do is they're using like a collection site, so they can take them back over to Verde.
Oh,
to make it easier for booking. Now, that might be the long-term solution there because they can't staff it, but I'll get there. So I'm looking at this, and then well, they must have built a replacement. They're going to decommission Verde, right? Maybe use it for training, simunitions. Who knows what they're going to use it for? So, and I scroll down to the bottom of the description, and it's 100, and I think their website says 147 beds, but I think they built 152. Let me just tell you, in 2003, I was supervising a lifer dorm with nothing but lifers, with me and one other correctional officer, with 160 life term inmates in the California Department of Corrections. They spent $61 million for luxurious accommodations for all the high-level county employees that are now a beautiful facility over there. And they built a little tick head of a jail that isn't going to help with the transportation problem at all. And they have a 600-person feeding capacity kitchen. So it's designed to be expanded. It's designed to spend more money on. Now, they could have expanded Verde, because they're bumping up, they're flirting with the cap population. They're doing okay. You could double. There's other remedies. You could double bunk. You could triple bunk. You could do things to get you through with the little spikes that happen throughout the year in jail pop. But for like literally a couple $1 million, they could have built an addition at Verde. But here's the kicker, right? So I'm like,
$70 million.
Right. Oh, it gets worse. You get ready to be more angry. You might want to have your drink in your hand because so you divide 70 by 152. And that equals $460,000 per bed. per bed. A cell, 2 beds, $1 million a cell. In California, the most expensive I could find, all the corruption, kickbacks, taxation, minimum wages, environmental fees. I could go on and on about how difficult it is to do anything in California. $270,000 per bed. WTF, what happened?
That's like the price of a house here.
Dude, I could have hired a real estate agent with $70 million and say, hey, could you buy a house for each one of these 152 guys?
Yeah.
With $460,000? Oh, yeah.
For
Oh,
sure.
yeah.
Or even 2 houses.
Yeah, sometimes they need a breakout room, right? So they can go start their businesses, cannabis business in their house next door. So I'm like tripping. I'm like, this can't be right. But it is, right? And so that was the signal for me. Oh, there's a serious problem. To add insult to injury, California 270, Yavapai County got the property for free on a swap with the city. They didn't have to even encumber the.
So $70 million doesn't include the land that it sits on.
Exactly. And then they've got, don't quote me on the exact number, but it's something about like $3.8 million. I think it is $3.8 million of funds dedicated to mental health and rehabilitative services. Except there's nobody being incarcerated there, right? It's a collection site. And so they're the director of mental health and their spokesperson. What? Never even heard of such a thing. Rehabilitative services and their spokesperson. Dude, these could be other deputy positions or jailers, right? Correctional officers. What is going on? So I'm like, oh, this is getting worse. So I pivot from, hey, Mr. Rhodes, I want to work for you, to, oh my God, I got to start talking to folks because I escaped California, but the politics beat me here.
Yeah. Wow.
So it is scary. And so this jail is a wreck.
Yeah.
They can't staff it. That's the last thing. And we can move on is they're short-staffed and very dangerously short-staffed. It's dangerous for the correctional staff. Quite frankly, it could be dangerous for inmates. Not enough supervision, intake, medical services, right?
Yeah.
And so how are they possibly going to staff the new jail? And so I tell you what happens, right? I was a correctional officer and got ordered over, which means you think you're going home, and they freeze the gate. They say, go back to the watch office, and you got another 8-hour shift, and that keeps happening, right? And eventually you start thinking, for this amount of money, maybe I could do something else.
Yeah.
And so attrition goes through the roof when it's not staffed properly. Staff burnout happens, injuries, danger. So the same symptom we have with patrol being burdened, understaffed, bleeding people through attrition, same things happen to correctional staff. Wow. And I tell you, if you're a sheriff's deputy or correctional officer, you want me as your sheriff because you will be my priority.
Right on. Okay. Well, that's really, really demoralizing and unfortunate that they spent that amount of money. You got more?
One more thing.
Send it.
Who was the Apple guy that said one more thing? Was it Jobs? Steve Jobs?
Steve Jobs,
yeah. He'd always say one more thing. So, so how did this get funded? You asked.
Yeah.
Or you were thinking it. I could tell. How did this get funded? The Board of Supervisors used a wrinkle in the Arizona Constitution that limits how much you can raise property tax at one time. There are guardrails, so people can't go crazy, right? Mm-hmm. But there is an asterisk that says, except if you build something. And I'm not sure if you're a homeowner or not. I suspect you are.
I am.
Did you know that your property taxes went up by 18% because of the jail, specifically to fund the building of the jail? And it won't be paid. That bond won't be paid off until long after I'm dead.
What?
Yeah, that happened. And that board did it unilaterally. And so I have criticisms of the Board of Supervisors at that time who voted for that money.
18%?
18%, bro. That happened.
Okay.
And so there's that communication going between these different entities. They're working together. And so when I've been critical of the board, and I've been critical of the GOP who did, cover their eyes and they didn't speak out about this. And there was plenty of people who were concerned about this jail, and they should have been.
Have you been to that facility?
Been out in front of it. I don't think I'm going to get an invitation to get inside there for a tour.
Do you know what it takes, what it costs to build a building in general?
Well, I can tell you, I do know. In California, in the real estate world, it's dollars per square foot, right?
Yeah.
Hey, this house will pull $250 per square foot, $350 per square foot, something like that, right? In the correctional world, it's dollars per bed. And so in California, gold-plated beds, people there clipping your toenails, right? Bocce ball. Where did the money go?
Right.
Because I'm pretty confident that you and I together, if we were given $70 million, could have delivered more, twice as much for half the cost.
Yeah.
We could have hired California contractors and submitted to California building regulations, just imported them here and done it for half the cost. So I'm sure you and I could do better.
Yeah.
I volunteer to manage jail projects just like that anywhere here.
Man, that's crazy. Well, let's wrap that up and move along through these questions. What is justice?
Well, there's a couple moving pieces there, right? Like I said earlier, everything that I do as a peace officer has got to pass the lens of the Constitution and that North Star. Maximizing liberty while with the least impact to people, while protecting and serving them. And so justice, there's an intersection of these two things. Justice is protecting the people with the least amount of impact in their lives. Mm-hmm. And justice, there's an aspect of transparency and consistency and predictability to it. So if you're a wealthy millionaire that gets a DUI, or a sheriff that gets a DUI, you're treated the same way as you would be treated if you picked up a DUI.
Yeah.
So does that mean early probation? Does that mean, retaining your ability to drive a car? There's a lot of different things. Look, adhering to the tenets of liberty, protecting the public, being transparent, and being consistent. And then your litmus test is the public satisfied with your job? So you've got to stay connected with the public because you are a public servant.
Yeah.
So that's how I see these two intersecting pressures to come out with the best outcome that maximizes both things.
Right on. Thank you. Do you believe that all laws are just?
No. Just to highlight that, look.
Yeah.
There's such a thing called nullification, where a sheriff can use their authority to say, hey, this law is bullshit.
Yeah.
And you've got to be very careful with that responsibility. But I've already highlighted an area in which it's not negotiable. The Second Amendment is not negotiable, but there's others, right? The Fourth Amendment centers around search. Mm-hmm. It's not negotiable. That includes your cell phone records, bank transactions. Think January 6th. Think everywhere the Biden administration trampled on rights on January 6th. Think the Fifth Amendment, due process, right? Due process wasn't given to those folks. I'm going to make sure over hell or high water due process is here, even if it means inconvenience for my processes, right? Because the North Star is liberty and the Constitution. And then if you look at the Ninth and 10th Amendment, right, they center on rights. And at the end of both sentences of those, reserved for the people, you read the Ninth and 10th Amendment, the end, reserved for the people. If the federal government didn't give you the rights, it doesn't say it, doesn't mean they don't exist. They're reserved for the people. And if the powers haven't been given to the state, the federal government, then they're reserved for the state or the people. And so those two, the Ninth and 10th, nicely dovetail into the aims of the Fourth and Fifth. And we protect all of those rights through our speech, and we protect our speech through people still having that power. The Bill of Rights is constructed by geniuses.
Yes.
I don't think I understood that until I was in my 30s, right?
Yeah.
These folks, this was something special.
And it still is.
It still is.
Excellent. Thank you. How do you feel about the no victim, no crime mindset?
Okay, so look, you know, I've spoken to some very intelligent, good folks that are absolutists on this thing, right? And we end up parting ways when we start talking about specific examples. So I want the least officious, least burdensome sheriff's department that can happen, right?
Yeah.
But if you are camping on the steps of the Yavapai County Superior Courts, who's the victim?
I'm going to say I am.
I agree with you.
Because I don't like that shit.
I don't either, right? Look,
That's a stretch to say I'm a victim, but I see your point.
Right. And so there are folks who are absolutists on this issue and say, hey, man, you can camp on public property. Now, here's the rub. Here's the fact. It's a fact. It's a tough fact. It's unpleasant. It's antithetical to many people's thoughts. But we talked about anything you destigmatize, anything you subsidize, you get more of.
Yeah. So if you allow people to camp on the steps of the justice or the Superior Court, then there's going to be more of it before too long.
Right. And here's the byproduct of this. We know there's a direct relationship to drug abuse, violence, homicide, and crime associated with homelessness.
Yes.
And as we destigmatize and subsidize homelessness, we get more of it. And so in a sense, through a statistical model, through a cold mathematical analysis, you are hurting the very people you claim to be helping. Every time, if you build it, they will come. If you build a 1,000-person homeless shelter in the middle of Prescott, it will be filled in 2 years, and it will be over capacity. Because there is a percentile of people who are opting out of our society.
Yeah.
And the social stigma and pressure to contribute and stay within the guardrails that is better for them. They're less likely to use drugs. They're less likely to hurt people. They're less likely to hurt themselves. And so this has been thoroughly vetted. It seems difficult for folks that are well-meaning on the left to understand, hey, you mean by withholding resources and help to some of these folks, I'm helping them? Yes.
Yeah, well, it's like a kid. You give a kid too much stuff.
Yes.
They're going to become a spoiled kid.
So imagine this. I'm the deputy director of state parole, which means I have agents in every city in the state of California.
Jeez.
And I'm tracking cities' approaches to homelessness, generally through city ordinance, like Prescott. And I spoke at the Prescott City Council when they did their study group on lessening the penalties around camping on public property. And
they tried to lessen them, or they did.
Well, they're in the midst of it.
Okay.
And our Prescott City Attorney said with a straight face, "Well, the Sixth Circuit Court has weighed in on this, and we can't penalize people for being homeless. Therefore, we're going to have to redo our statutes. So sorry. I wish it was different."
Well, you don't have to penalize them. Just tell them to leave.
He lied. This is where I have an advantage over my competitors, is that I've lived this in California. City attorneys are referencing I said the Sixth Circuit Court, the Ninth Circuit Court. Also,
Okay.
I said earlier, Section 41 of the Constitution for sheriff's responsibilities is Section 11.
Okay.
I'll blame it on getting old. So, I created a heat map
Yeah.
of parole revocation and each municipality that was engaged in decriminalizing homelessness. And the heat maps got more red wherever it happened. And our homelessness percentage of parolees grew.
So you have legitimate, actual data that shows the results of those actions.
Yes. And so I shared this idea, much to the chagrin of a couple people.
Do you still have access to that data?
No, I won't have access to anything out of the California Department of Corrections after blasting Gavin Newsom through the whistleblower videos I did through California Insider. So I am a pariah to the Marxist, evil Marxist, extreme violent left.
Yeah.
in California, and quite proud to be a pariah to them. So the moment, by the way, I drop those videos, even in retirement, you get to retain access to that, boof, everything.
Oh, they blocked it all.
Yeah, all blocked it all.
Damn.
But anyway, so the data is clear. We are these loving left woke agenda things are hurting the exact population. Indisputable fact that we think we're helping.
No,
That's not true.
People are confused because if that really is the position of those people, to be sympathetic or empathetic or compassionate to the people who are hurting, they're not willing to look far enough to recognize that is this form of action actually helping them? Is this actually compassionate?
No outcome measures necessary, right? If you want to virtue signal publicly, you wear the mask.
Well, that's
you
different.
say you care more than everybody else.
Yeah.
And that's all you have to do. No science necessary.
Well, that's not real compassion. That's selfishness.
Narcissism.
And yeah.
That's what it is.
Right on. Well, let's see what else we got here. What rumors are floating around about you that have merit or don't have merit? What are people going to say to try and prevent you from becoming sheriff?
I could take some guesses. I mean, California, I've met, I met some of the other night. It's like, hey man, are you a plant from California? Like it's like I'm some secret Marxist, you know.
Well, what they'll do is they'll position people to take things over in years to come. That's what happens.
I'm not concerned about this because the message has been well received, and fortunately, I have a long. If you Google Doug Eckenrod on the internet, I mean, there's only two of us. One's my 70-year-old dad, and one's me. Only ever been two. My whole career is sort of laid out by year going back. I mean, you can see the positions I held. I did a lot of media, the equivalent of episode of Cops. I was on television a lot of print stories that I was involved with, high-profile cases. And of course the Epoch Times. So I think if someone spent like 1 second looking at me, the California thing turns into a bonus. They turn the frown upside down. Like, oh, okay, this guy did see how the sausage is made, and is warning us, you know, where the landmines.
That's what's great about you is that you've seen the demise of that place firsthand, and you know how it happened, so you know what to look for and what not to do, what to prevent, and how to show it.
The other area where, you know, God, good fortune, working hard, I never got in trouble. There was no EEO. I had the public, for the most part, liked me. I never had never a single peace officer complaint, never a use of force that was questioned. I had a very clean career. And so, you know, you wouldn't say something like that because you know that's going to encourage people to dig unless it's true. Mm-hmm. And man, you know, I was very square in my career. You know, I kept between the lines, but I also was raised, you know, God, the Constitution, public service, do the right thing.
Yeah.
And that transitioned right into my role as a peace officer.
Well, that's one of my other questions is how did your moral compass get calibrated, and like, what do you believe spiritually?
Right. So I'm a Christian. And I generally don't make this part of my campaign thing, but, you know, I got asked this at an event the other night. Christ died, rose again. Without his co-signature at the pearly gates, I am not getting in. And so I'm asking him for his forgiveness on a daily basis.
Right on.
And I have not been perfect, but I will be judged by somebody higher than Biden or Gavin Newsom when I meet. So I'm trying to pay it forward a little bit if I can.
Right on. What is a life lesson that you learned after messing something up?
Well, okay, so I'll talk about more of a leadership axiom that I live by. So, as a sergeant, as a young supervisor, as a young manager in law enforcement, you're gonna supervise people who make mistakes. This is going to happen.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between a mistake and a fatal mistake. A fatal mistake would be lying, right? Cheating, stealing. You fire people for that, right? Serious character issues. You may fire people for that. But the vast majority of errors, and I've made them and not gotten in trouble for them, right? Luckily, right? is you're attempting to bring people back into the fold always. Somebody strays, you're trying to train them, motivate them, bring them back into the fold, correct it. You don't use your position of authority as a mechanism to demonstrate your willingness to chop people's careers and lives.
Well said.
So you're always trying to, whenever you can, rehabilitate the employee and the incarcerated. You do that through leadership.
Yes.
And that matriculates down through your team. And so you set a tone of what your expectations are. And so I have had people that, and so early in my career, somebody does this and this equals that. Well, no, it's not. It's a little more gray, right? Time on the job, training. Are they receptive to some counseling?
So it's case by case.
It's case by case. You're trying to bring people back into the fold. And that's what you're doing with employees. And also, look, I arrested a lot of people. I mean, there was a time where I was arresting on some of these task force, man, we were pulling down literally like 80 bodies a month. The team split up, right?
Bodies being arrests, not corpses.
Yes. Where you've got you've got 4 small teams out looking for folks with warrants.
Yeah.
In a high density, high crime area, and
is this a SWAT type of
unit? This is called the California Parole Apprehension Team.
So you using?
So basically, think of the U.S. Marshals.
Yeah.
Sworn peace officers working for the state of California, only focused on parolees, probationers, and anybody else you come across that have warrants.
State level marshals.
Okay. Did that for years.
So then, do you use extra cool equipment and stuff like that, like SWAT does?
Or investigative techniques, which you would, which.
So you're not breaching doors.
And most men that are on the run are supported by a female. In fact. And so idea of throwing your phones and going across country, most of these folks that have warrants that are on the run are miles from their starting point. Right. So, and so you transition on the spot, get up on the radio, call in your team, set up an op plan, integrate with local law enforcement, get up on the radio, look how you're going to approach. If you need a warrant, most of these places are searchable through probation or parole. But if you need a warrant, you'll get one, and you move to a sort of a SWAT role where you are going to force entry if you can't gain entry through cooperation of people that are inside.
Right on. Okay. Well, when it comes to threats facing the county and the people that live in this county, what would you say is the biggest internal threat?
Internal threat. We talked about the rehabilitative industrial complex and that Prescott and Yavapai County have a disproportionate number of rehabilitative centers because they're profitable. It's very lucrative.
Yeah.
I mean, you could turn a 4-bedroom house into something that's generating thousands of dollars above the mortgage per month immediately profitable. And so 2 things are happening. We're attracting people from all over the state because of our wonderful weather in the summer. And so you've noticed, I'm sure, the increased number of transient looking folks.
Oh yeah,
they're coming here. Right?
They're all over the park. They're in the creek.
Yeah,
they're getting to be more.
If you build it, they will come.
Yeah,
and here's where the state and counties across the state are hurting us, and in cooperation with failure to take action by local probation and the sheriff's office. So in California, they're doing a lot of things wrong. About 99 out of 100 things wrong. But one thing you do with probation and parole in California is there's an export-import list. And so you're not going to send a whole bunch more people out of your county than you take in.
Mm-hmm.
And some counties will close. In other words, hey, we're full. There's no accountability here in Yavapai County on that. And so probation chiefs across the state pushing people here. And something that's a bizarre wrinkle that I've never seen before anywhere other than Yavapai County is that, much of my career was in parole. And parolees are searchable by any peace officer in the state. So you're on parole. I'm able to identify that. You self-identify as being on parole, on active parole supervision or probation. Me in any uniform as a sworn peace officer, turn around, put your hands behind your back. I'm going to pat you down, search for weapons and drugs. Do you have anything on you? And you must do that. Must. In Yavapai County, the sheriff here, as well as a couple other sheriffs in the state, have unilaterally said, no, we don't have that authority. And they do.
So it's a won't rather than a can't.
Right.
Why?
Now, they're arguing that it's a can't.
Why?
I think that I'm only speculating. I'm prepared to be wrong. So if, one of your viewers has an answer to this, I'd love to hear it. But
yeah,
probation is a weird machine, and probation wants to protect probation. And so how do you protect probation work? Well, only probation officers could do it.
Mm-hmm.
I take the tack that the work's not mutually exclusive. I want as many positive contacts with law enforcement documented as possible if I'm going to discharge somebody from probation, right? You're on probation for something, you made a mistake, you corrected your life, you come across law enforcement, you're going to be as cooperative as possible. You want to demonstrate that, hey, I am done with this so I can discharge this probation. And so we're doing probationers a disservice, those who want to do right,
mm-hmm.
by taking those opportunities away from them in a sense. And simultaneously, those who want to do wrong, believe me, they talk to one another.
Yeah.
They know what municipality, what sheriff's office is doing what.
Oh, yeah.
And, hey, they don't fuck with you in Yavapai County.
Yeah.
Oh, cool, bro. All right.
Let's go there.
Let's go there.
Yeah.
And we're going to go to a program, and then we're going to fall out of the program, and then we'll be walking around with a sack,
mm-hmm.
And the numbers are growing. And so as sheriff, again, you use that voice. I believe that I'm on the right side of the law. So much so that I'm willing to run the risk of being sued by it. And so there will be immediate sea change. If somebody is identified as being on probation or parole, you've got the right to search them.
Yeah.
And pursuant to that lawful search, if there are law violations found, you're going to arrest them. And then we'll see how that works out. Because I'm not against parolees coming here or probationers coming here for recovery.
Right.
If they're here for recovery.
Yeah. Awesome. So then the biggest internal threat would be
that failure.
Okay.
The programs that are drawing transients, people who aren't doing well.
Awesome.
Unemployed here, and the failure for law enforcement to take the appropriate action. That's the biggest threat.
That's a great answer. I haven't heard anybody say that. I really appreciate that. What would you say is the biggest external threat?
Well, quite honestly, we're not going to get out of this financial problem that's looming nationally. And that problem's gonna touch here at some point.
Yeah.
And then the problem is it's going to be a financial challenge, much like 2008, and it's going to impact state, county, and city governments and their budgets. And we better start preparing now for what is coming, because if you are at all concerned about our economy, you've got to understand the domino effect to county and state, city level law enforcement and other service deliveries.
How would one prepare for what's coming?
You got to get your budget in alignment.
Your own personal budget?
Well, I would argue that as a person, you should have a firearm. You should have a couple months of food. You should be able to heat your home. That kind of stuff. Some fuel stored. I mean, these are just basic prepping aspects. But from a law enforcement agency,
well, even if you take the word prepping out, it's common sense.
Yes.
You never know what could happen. You could lose your job. You could get laid off, then not have enough money for food.
But if you're a county law enforcement entity like the sheriff's office,
yes,
and you're dependent on Katy Hobbs handouts via fake titled task force grants, that is political lipstick for her, and silences potential detractors in the very important position of Arizona sheriffs, you can count on that money gone. And how are you going to make payroll? And so because we've built a system dependent on federal and state dollars, We better get ahead of it, much like the educational system. And so that, like, many times people, hey, is it AR-15s? Is it another helicopter? No. Number one is we cannot be beholden to the state and federal government when things get rough. And
Excellent.
that, as I see, the most prescient threat to us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One other question about, you mentioned that the current sheriff is the chair for all the sheriffs in Arizona?
Yeah, president of the Arizona Sheriff's Association.
President of the Arizona Sheriff's Association. So is that him personally, or is it the Yavapai County Sheriff holds that position no matter what?
No, what that means is and I must admit, I'm not exactly sure the process of getting that position. I suspect it is with the consent of state government and with the sheriffs, the 15 sheriffs of the 15 counties. I'm not sure how he got the job, but he's got the job.
Yeah.
And he's not using that megaphone to blast Biden and Hobbs on the border failure. No, he's saying, Katy Hobbs, give me more money. And
That's pretty unfortunate.
and that's pretty unfortunate. And he's quoted on Katy Hobbs' website in a quite loving, embracing way that concerned me a little bit.
Yeah, okay. When it comes to these types of potential collapses that we're talking about or whatever, I mean, maybe this question is irrelevant if you can't even make payroll for your employees, but
Yeah.
my question is about deputizing citizens.
Oh, brother. Yes.
What does that consist of, and under what circumstances do you think that's appropriate? Things like that.
I was worried. I put together a plan for the worst. What would I do as sheriff? Let me start with this. Yavapai County is huge. The idea that 107 patrol deputies with a compliant, somewhat elderly population could police it during tough times, during a crisis, war, financial collapse.
107?
That's it.
Is that all there is?
That's all there is.
That's the amount of deputies in the entire county?
And they've got 20
For all 3 shifts?
Yeah, and 20 of them have been redirected
To what?
to the task force or just not filled, so you get the salary savings.
What?
That's I obviously I did not do a good job of explaining that thoroughly. That's what the problem is. We're not fully staffed.
That's nothing.
Nothing. So imagine the slightest disruption here that's persistent. So here's my plan. You have 4 command areas for Yavapai County Sheriff's Office, plus jail operations. I would deputize 500 Yavapai County citizens. That will happen. The sheriff has the authority to do that. In fact, you'll be surprised to learn that the only requirement is that you shoot the Arizona post course. So take you to a ditch.
So just like the Rangers, you have to
Yes.
just pass the shooting course.
Yes.
And you can be deputized.
Yes.
Is that in the Arizona Constitution?
Yes.
Or really?
So I looked at this. And
This is
boy,
great.
It's easy. The threshold is low, right? And then I'm thinking, well, how would you stand something up quickly? And so, obviously I'm an Arizona Ranger, and there's nearly 100 Rangers. They'd be deputized immediately.
Excellent.
But there's some other organizations too that you're riding infrastructure like the Jeep Posse.
I was going to ask
Rescue.
you about the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. First of all, what's your stance on those guys, and
Look,
would you
both-
deputize them?
I would not exclude them. I don't know that I would say, hey, I'm going to deputize the organization.
As a group, yeah.
But if you're a Proud Boy or you're an Oath Keeper and you're not a felon and you can pass my course and you're of good moral character and you want to serve, bring it on,
Awesome.
right? Bring it on. And so you need 500 folks, 100 associated with each command area, 1 to support the jail operations.
And that would be volunteer at that point?
Be volunteer, would not be pay. But
Yeah.
let me tell you, the spirit of service in this county, man,
Yeah.
we've got so many veterans, former EMTs, folks who've got skills, heck, carpenters, just men and women of good moral character that want to support and defend the Constitution and support the Sheriff's Office in its public safety mission.
Yeah.
And that, it's reserved for an emergency. But look, there's 2 things that happen 30 days within taking office. One is every 3-letter agency, law enforcement agency, gets a letter saying when you're going to come into Yavapai County, you got to submit to this.
Yeah.
And the second is you got to develop a robust, actionable plan to set up an emergency deputized force to support law enforcement operations in the county. Because anybody who's saying that 107 people can do it, and it's not 107, it's literally like 80 that are actually pushing a car, right? Well, I'll send them to one of those rehabilitative programs because it can't be done. And you need...
They must be high.
They must be high.
They're thinking that that's possible. Wow, that's incredible. Like if you take the entire citizen population of Yavapai County and compare it to 107, split between 3 shifts.
Oh, it's
at best you're getting what, less than 40, 35 people per shift for the entire county of.
And think about, look, you've got like 99.99% of compliance for the public right now. Imagine
compliance.
Yeah, doing the right things, right?
Yeah.
It's a tiny number of folks who create the need for the level of law enforcement we have right now. That could turn into 1% of people going crazy, which would blow the ability to house them, to move them, to police them. And so getting the public's engagement in their own safety during times of emergency is the key.
See, and another reason this is the key is because as an American, if you want the freedom that you have and if you want to retain it, then you have to be actively retaining it.
Brother,
you can't
Yeah.
can't just sit back and expect somebody else to continue to do it for you.
You got to have some skin in the game, right?
Yeah. Otherwise, we're going to end up with the fraud and the corruption
Right.
that we have right now.
Right.
All right. Let's see. What is your stance on teaching kids it's okay to change their gender?
Well, clearly that's okay because the education, the educational.
You're being facetious.
I'm being facetious.
Yeah.
The educational system has no business talking about anything of sexual nature to children. Mm-hmm. And I can't even imagine what I would do as a parent if my 6-year-old came home and had that idea inserted into their young, spongy mind.
And are you a parent? Do you have children?
They're adults.
Okay.
So I missed all of this insanity. These people are evil.
Huh. Yeah.
And I I was around some of these maniacs in California, right, that were decriminalizing sodomy of minors, rape of minors.
What the
Yes. So this is what they did. Are you familiar with the penal code PC 290? PC 290 in California makes you a sex offender, right?
Okay.
And you're familiar with the sex offender registry idea because we have
Yes.
one here in Arizona. And so pedophiles, in my opinion, have wrestled positions in state government, in legislature, on the Public Safety Committee, and successfully advanced legislation that would say, "Hey, man, it's sexist and it's homophobic and transphobic to penalize people that rape with sodomy because homosexual men, that's an outlet for them, right?" And so they said, well, hey, this is not a registrable offense anymore. It would be if you raped a minor within a certain amount of age difference from the perpetrator. It's a fact. Governor Newsom signed it into law. It's no longer a registrable offense, and it might be prosecuted as a misdemeanor.
That's terrible.
Now think about some shitbag climbing out of your window at 3 a.m. with your son, 12-year-old son, the victim. I suspect, knowing you, it probably wouldn't be a pretrial diversion opportunity for this person because they'd be in front of the pearly gates. But nonetheless, I'm not advocating for vigilantism, but nonetheless, that is something that would be a natural human desire to do.
Well, justice in the face of unjust laws is just, regardless of the consequences that come with it.
I can't argue against that.
And I hate to say that,
right,
because that's like what the January 6th people are going through. A lot of those people didn't do anything.
But they didn't commit a crime.
That's the thing.
Right.
They didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
But it's the same situation.
Find me the man and I will find you the crime.
If somebody rapes your child and you shoot that person dead,
right,
that sounds like justice to me.
It feels like it. It certainly does. I don't disagree.
Yeah.
So these people exist and they are attracted to positions in the government because they can have influence on what happens. Look, what they want to do is lower the age of consent. That's the goal. That's the holy grail. That's coming.
What they call minor attracted persons.
Yeah.
Right.
Child rapist.
Yes.
Right. I arrested probably 500.
Thank you.
Of them.
Thank
right?
you.
And You pray for those folks, right? Pray for those folks, but you punish those folks.
Yeah.
And the surest way to ensure they don't have access to your children is to fairly investigate and prosecute, and if they're found guilty, incarcerate. And to spin this any other way other than this is one of the most abominable crimes that there possibly can be, is evil itself.
Yeah, the Bible talks about tying millstones around the necks of those who would harm the children, and
I was around long enough to see some folks that
dropping them in the ocean.
I'd sent to prison, picked up good righteous cases, picked up years, and I was in the field in some of these locations long enough to see them come out and do it again. Not kidding. Now talk about, there's some things I won't say on camera, but talk about some of the emotions and thoughts. Very, very dark. That's where you have to have a relationship with something above you.
One of the most tragic things about that situation is, regardless of what happens, whatever kind of justice happens to the perpetrator, that won't change what happened to the child.
Right.
And that's tragic.
Go back to your original question that I was being facetious on.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, but there's something that just drives me crazy, right? I think the real heroes in this whole thing are the parents at school boards.
Yeah.
Because, before this whole pedophile surge was happening, I really didn't. I must say, I didn't pay much attention to school board. I've voted Republican my entire life. Whatever my card said to do, I did. Never had to think about books and
Curriculum.
sex training and these homosexual encounters that are lionized as some sort of expression of freedom. And this is pornography, right? And the fact that we aren't politically stomping folks who won't articulate their position on this is unbelievable.
Yeah.
But I do have the sense that in Yavapai County, in this area, the parents are turning up on regards to this issue, and I think they're more educated and energized in regards to what the school board should or should not be allowing to come in than they are in regards to the sheriff's office.
Yeah. There's a lot going on there. Apparently there's some stuff happening in the schools that's not cool, not kosher.
Right.
I haven't been to any school board meetings yet.
But I do have the sense the momentum is on our side on this issue, and this next election will be a litmus test.
Well, February 10th, and there's February 10th in Prescott. There's some sort of family-friendly drag show or pride parade or something, and there's some group that has been scheduling these all around the state in these rural areas. You're tracking?
I think it's 4 a.m. Productions is behind it.
I thought there was a different name.
Okay.
Rainbow something.
Right.
I don't know.
On their website, it says they want to bring the queer lifestyle to Prescott.
Yeah, so it's not just Prescott.
Yeah,
They're
right.
operating
It's a statewide.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So my question to you for that would be, as citizen or as law enforcement, what can be done to prevent that kind of stuff from happening? Because it's not family friendly, it's not kid friendly,
Right.
and it's it's not okay. There's places for that stuff. There's a reason there's no strip clubs in Yavapai County.
Sure. So here's the way it works. If you're going to have an adult themed anything in a municipality, Prescott, for example, probably where they're going to want to go, any city, generally requires a license, right? Because there's alcohol served, and if there's alcohol served, you have to have security. You may
Really?
Yes. And that was an issue, and I'm intimately familiar with this because of the Rangers. This touched our organization because some of these folks attempted to bring the organization into provide security for them, right? So here's the tough part. I'm going to pull this issue apart. There are things that I detest. They're protected by the First Amendment. Here are things that aren't protected by the First Amendment. Touch my kid, expose them to pornography. You get a result you're not going to like.
Yeah.
Right? And
it doesn't fall under freedom of expression.
Right, absolutely not. Because there are laws that are explicitly protect children from pornographic material. It's a crime. Analogous to giving alcohol to children. Bringing pornographic material and laundering it through a school board who's not paying attention doesn't preclude them from liability, civil or otherwise, in my estimation, right?
Yeah.
Like if you knowingly serve, you're the manager of a bar and you knowingly allow alcohol to be served, are you responsible? Yes, right? There are penalties associated with it. But here's where it gets a little bit trickier, right? Because we live with liberty at the forefront. A 21 and older venue that's doing things that I'm personally revolted by, that meets they have a permit, and they have and to get the permit they have whatever requirements are set forth by them. If they're serving alcohol, generally there's higher requirements, right? You got to have a security person at the door or something like that. They can do it. There is not a law enforcement nexus to that. Does it make sense?
It does.
I don't like it, but we're looking about what's legal and lawful. You got to look at the North Star of liberty. There are things that I detest that does not have a law enforcement nexus. So I stay mute. It's not, but from a political standpoint, right? From a political standpoint, do we want to have adult-themed programming at all? And are you going to give a business license to it? And who controls the business licenses? People can get politically energized because now, instead of just looking at the Board of Supervisors' elected positions and scrutinizing their positions, now you want to look at the mayor and the city council folks who create the ordinances that allow businesses to do certain things. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It does.
So we have to pull these, we can't conflate these issues because quite frankly, law enforcement does not have the authority to intervene with adults, with adult-themed entertainment, if it's sanctioned by the city through a business license to do these things.
And there's already laws that exist that say that children can't be a part of that.
Exactly.
That's the thing.
Now imagine there might be extra people driving by to ensure that that's not happening, right? There are things that informally can take place. You might have you might be extra safe on that street for that entire event because there'll be a lot of law enforcement personnel to ensure that those minimum thresholds are being adhered to.
Excellent. I suppose my last real topic that I want to ask you about, other than the woke stuff, because then the kids stuff, would be domestic enemies. In the military, you take an oath. I don't know if police do. Mm-hmm. To
uphold, defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Arizona against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So help me God.
So, does the law define what constitutes a domestic enemy? Because I see plenty.
Yeah. We could have spent the entire time talking about this.
Maybe next time.
Let me tell you what it's not. Sometimes it's easier to define something by what it's not. Mm-hmm. So when there was a period of time when I ran the entire state of California's the California Parole Apprehension Team, right? And an intel unit with intel analysts that were looking for folks who were on the run. And those intel analysts were housed with an FBI task force. And the folks on the FBI, I'm not a big fan of I'm less than a big fan of the FBI. I detest the FBI because they've been taken over, hijacked for
weaponized.
Weaponized,
yeah. Without people standing up.
Right. But the folks I worked with at the time were good men and women. They cared about public safety like you and I did. But man, what it did is it put me on the FBI's circular, their confidential mailing list that would talk about monthly emerging threats. And this is going to validate what a lot of people already know or concerned about or have read about. It's factual. I was upset about it, and I talked about it quite a bit with my staff. The threats were always Christians, returning veterans, folks who talk about the Constitution, white male adults.
The threats to what?
Yeah. just about to blow a building up.
What are they
just
threatening?
just about to start shooting places up. Just about to launch an attack. Just about to attack power stations. Just about to attack dams. And so the FBI,
Like we're going to destroy our own infrastructure because of your shortcomings.
right? Because you're a white male Christian. It's enough.
And a veteran.
And a veteran. On top of it, oh my God forbid.
Yeah, I'm on whatever lists.
Yeah,
they
you're
have.
already flagged. Yeah,
God
maybe
forbid I go to a school board meeting and get put on the domestic terrorist
right,
list.
right. And so,
Freaking crazy.
my friend, this would be like, 12 months a year. Like eight out of 12 months, it would be talking about the threat of white supremacy. It's imminent.
Who is coming up with this?
Because the whole FBI has been tasked to look for a ghost. Look, here's the bottom line. In 1920, the Ku Klux Klan had an enrollment of something like 1.2 million. Like it was a real organization. They killed people, lynched people, all sorts of terrible stuff, right? Horrible organization. But today, their numbers are like 500, right? And the average age is like 70 years old. There's some
Really?
splinter groups, yeah. Look, these organizations, they pose statistically almost 0.0000, like the COVID threat, right? It's
Right.
compared to organized crime and gangs and our own federal government to some extent. And so what I think has happened is some of the pointy heads in Washington, some of the deep thinkers that know the trajectory of policies that are coming, have anticipated what group might not be too happy about the Constitution being replaced with something new. And so what you do is you impugn them early, right? You impugn them early. Look at the way Trump was treated. What happened before the election? Trump was a hero of the rap community, right? And all of a sudden, they knew he was going to run and they started attacking him. You identify your potential threats before they even know they're a threat. And so you begin to impugn this.
It's only really a threat to the progression of the form of government that's being practiced, right?
Exactly.
That's
And
all
then,
it is.
Anytime I want. So I've got a laser pointer with highly trained Tier 1 operators that work for the feds, right? Former military folks who aren't politically vested, right? They're
it's
a
doing a
hammer.
job.
They're a hammer, and they just point where the nail's at.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I had a kind of a silly story, a bad joke I did on a friend of mine. I had a cat when I was in college, crazy cat. And it was back when laser pointers were pretty new, and the thing would just go nuts for the laser pointer, right? So I'm drinking with some buddies, and what happens with one of your friends at a party? Somebody always falls asleep.
Yeah.
And they're sitting like you are, but maybe the legs splayed a little bit, right? And the arms are out to the side. So I've got the cat into a frenzy.
Ooh, man, I see where this is going.
Whoop, right? And
You point the laser pointer at the groin, and the
Right.
cat attacks the groin.
So you sharpen the tool, you get them frenzied on things that are legitimate,
and then
and they will
point
go
them.
to anywhere you want.
Yeah.
And that's, we don't make a correction in this next election, it's over, brother. In my opinion.
I understand.
I just don't look. These people have committed so many crimes; they can never let go of power, or they're giving power to people who are going to investigate them.
Yeah.
And so, what level of resistance, like the person that's barricaded in the home that's facing life in prison, right? How cooperative are they going to be?
Zero.
Yeah. And so, this is dangerous. This is really dangerous.
Yeah, it feels like we're beyond a point of no return,
It does.
and I hope that's not the case.
I hope to be wrong. Right?
Yeah.
I'm praying I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I hope people make fun of me for being a little bit concerned, but that means it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And I get to continue bilking the state of California with my retirement check every year and enjoying this. But man, there comes a point. I'm an expert in this area. I've watched this happen. I'm watching it develop, and I'm like, they don't do this for nothing.
Right.
So,
Wow. Well, that's all I have. Is there anything you'd like to share with the people?
well, first with you, thank you for inviting me. This has been very pleasurable.
Yeah.
I enjoy talking about this stuff. I'm sure I made a couple of mistakes in here. Man, I won't be shy to get corrected.
Yeah.
But I love this country. I certainly love Yavapai County.
Yeah.
Love the people here. And I want to contribute more in a meaningful way. If you like some of the things that I've said and you want to hear more of the conversation, it doesn't necessarily mean you're voting for me, but I'd love for you to go to Eckenrod, Ekenrod, for sheriff.com. You'll see my ugly mug, my catfish picture that's from a few years ago, on the
Catfish picture.
on the cover. And do you know what the catfish picture means, by the way?
I think so. It means, oh, that's not what you really look like
Exactly.
when you meet in real life.
Exactly, yeah. And the second button down is, what's it say on there? It says, sign the petition.
Voter ballot nomination.
Voter ballot nomination. Push that button, and it's Arizona's new way, which scares me itself.
Digital
Signature. And if you're a Republican or an independent, you can sign my petition, which will allow me
You can't sign it if you're a Democrat.
Can't.
That's BS. Anybody should be able to sign it.
I agree because there's some Democrats out there where the Democratic Party left them. They don't know the Republicans yet that like this message, right?
Yeah.
And
Well
so
said.
I think they could quickly re-register as an independent if they're uncomfortable with the R, but I would really appreciate your support, and what you'll get in return is more dialogue and debate over these financial issues, all the way through August 9th.
Well, Doug, thank you so much. I think you would make an excellent sheriff, and
Thank
you
you
have
very
my
much.
support. I very much appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge and your experience and your perspective.
Thank you.
With me and all the folks.
If you ever need me back to talk about anything, clearly, I am
Accessible.
accessible and
Very
quite
cool.
willing to talk. So
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, sir.
thank you, and thank you very much.